Incorporate them into the.
Good morning. We are live. It's Wednesday, February 28th in Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We have some visitors and we're taking 2 votes today, so I thought we'd start with introductions. Senator Cummings, if you'd like to go.
I'm Senator Cummings. Ann Cummings. I live here in Montpelier. I represent the Washington District, which includes Stowe and a couple towns in Orange County, and I chair finance.
Do you have a UVM affiliation?
No. I got my master's at St. Michael's. Is that close
That's
enough?
close enough.
Like something back out. Do we have that?
No, I'm just, it's fun to share.
Is that a new requirement for qualification?
Should we just list our whole CV?
Yeah, right. No, we had law
And
school
get credit
students
for
and-
everything. That's what I would. Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District. Delighted Vice Chair to a UVM graduate. I sit next to a UVM graduate, Rebecca.
Yes.
And Majority Leader in the Senate.
Senator Keisha Hinsdale, I represent Southern Chittenden County in the Senate. I ran my campaign for the legislature as a senior at UVM, and I was student body president. So I really do believe green and gold. And I visited the State House and was taken around by Ernie Shand, who I love.
God.
And he said, maybe you'll be back here one day. And 2 years later, I sat 2 seats down from him. So if you're interested in running for office, I hope you do.
It was a strong Windsor County road there.
Yeah,
You were the
I'm
exception.
odd duck, yes. Senator Brock will probably walk in at some point. He represents Franklin County and he's the minority leader.
And Senator Wendy Harrison, I live in Brattleboro in the southeast part of the state. I represent the Wyndham County District. I did not go to UVM, but I was the interim city manager in Winooski and we dealt with UVM housing, student housing, so. Some of you. And I also serve on the institutions committee, which handles the capital bill. That's the 2-year capital bill, so. We all have 2 committees in this.
And several ad hoc committees.
So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you all for being here. For people who drove a long way.
Thanks, Senator Brock. Senator Brock, we have some students visiting and we're taking 2 votes. So we thought we'd do a round of introductions. I introduced you as a senator from Franklin County, who's also the minority leader. Is there anything else you wanted to?
No, that's fine. I'm Randy Brock. I'm the senator from Franklin County and I'm a minority leader.
You have a UVM affiliate, right? No, Middlebury. You went to Middlebury. That's
You went
right.
to
You
Middlebury.
went to Middlebury.
But were you on, and you weren't on the board at UVM.
No.
Okay.
But we both sit next to. Education.
And we
So
have,
it rubs off.
Middlebury's great too. So it's St. Mike's.
Every university is wonderful and we love and adore it. And we're
So-
grateful to.
So to remind all of us and anyone else watching, our first matter that we're taking up is a constitutional amendment. This is the first stop on a very long road that a constitutional amendment would have. Has to pass the full Senate, full House, come back to the Senate the next biennium, and then go to the voters. And it upholds the right to collectively bargain and form a union, right as that is under even greater attack the Supreme Court level, it sounds like, or in our courts and in the streets. To kick us off, we have our treasurer, Treasurer Michael Pieciak, who wanted to speak to the bill. Good morning, Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Ram Hinsdale. Thank you very much to the committee for having me. I submitted written testimony last week and just wanted to elaborate on that written testimony. I am a strong supporter of Proposal 3, and the angle that I want to talk about is economic benefit, both to the individuals and also to the broader economy when you're talking about the ability for workers to collectively bargain and the ability of unions to represent those workers. There was a U.S. Treasury Department report that was put out last summer, a first of its kind that looked at the economic benefit of collective bargaining and of unions. And the U.S. Treasury Department concluded that middle-class workers had wage increases, broader benefits, and improved work conditions across the board. Those wages could be anywhere from 10 to 20% higher, Those benefits include things like healthcare and retirement, and those workplace conditions lead to increased satisfaction, all of which the report concluded led to more productive economic output by those individuals in those industries. I'll make a note on the retirement security. That's a particularly critical issue. We know that Vermonters and many people across the country do not have retirement security. It leaves them vulnerable in their late years to be not living the kind of independent, dignified retirement that they want. We also know that in Vermont, we have strong pension systems that for our public sector workers benefiting from collective bargaining will help mitigate that and provide them an independent and dignified retirement. Also, that's a great example of a broader economic impact as well. Our pension systems here in Vermont, analysis from the AARP shows that for every dollar we invest in our pension systems, it turns out to be $4 of economic impact across the state of Vermont. So it's an economic driver, again, for the broader economy, but also for those individual family members. Also, when you're talking about being able to accumulate money through higher wages and more secure work conditions, you're also talking about being able to have some generational mobility as well. And we talked a little bit about this with baby bonds for those that I've talked with, but that importance of being able to have generational mobility in our economy, unfortunately, is more and more challenging. But children of union workers do have higher rates of mobility because of the acclimation of wealth over the time of a union career. So I think that's really important for us to consider as well. And then as great as these broad benefits are for those that work in industries or in businesses in which they're able to collectively bargain and do collectively bargain, there's also a spillover effect into the broader economy that workers that are not in a union also benefit from higher wages, stronger benefits, and better workplace conditions. So again, it has a broad impact across the middle class, and that is something that benefits the broader economy as well. The last point I just want to make on the proposal is one about Vermont's current workforce. I think we all know that we have to attract a workforce here in Vermont for the next generation, for those who are nurses, for our teachers, for construction workers. There are a lot of things we need in our state, like new schools and more housing. And those things won't get done without workers and electricians and plumbers and construction workers and the like. So I think this proposal to the Constitution would send a really strong message across the country that Vermont is supporting our middle class workers, that we support our unions, we support collective bargaining, and will serve as a beacon of light in some ways to workers that are interested in coming to a state and relocating to a state that values them in that significant of a way, that we would go through this long process, as Senator Rahm Hinsdale mentioned, to amend our Constitution to support their rights. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions, but just wanted to express my support for Proposal 3.
I think it's a great reminder from our treasurer about, the wealth building and economic mobility that unions
Really
create.
important.
And we appreciate that you wanted to speak to that before.
And we had such an articulate witness last week.
Oh,
We talked about what
Yeah.
she was able to say. I mean, she was just a terrific spokesperson for exactly what you're talking about, Mike.
Yes.
That's great.
She's part of the pipe fitters, or she was a carpenter.
She's a
Yeah,
carpenter. She's a master carpenter.
Yeah.
Lives in Hubbardton.
Got her dream home on a lake after years of hard
Oh,
work
wow.
and among the first women to benefit from Title IX.
And is able to retire on her union pension. So she was great. I don't think we got a better witness on that aspect of it.
Any questions? Do you have a?
I don't have any questions for the treasurer.
Okay.
I'm just gonna be the fly in the ointment again. Start out, I believe in unions. My husband's family was blackballed for union organizing. His sister tried to organize the parochial school teachers. Wasn't overly successful.
I like that idea.
Yeah, so anyway, but we haven't heard from any constitutional experts as to whether or not this is appropriate for the Constitution. There's an awful lot of bills supporting an awful lot of good things. But the Constitution is a sacred entity in the,
Mhm, mhm.
you know, the secular world. And I'd like to hear from somebody like Peter Teachout.
So a Peter Teachout type of person.
Yeah,
I'm looking at Damien, just, you know, if there were specific questions. I mean, we heard from someone from Illinois that it didn't,
we haven't
Cause
heard
kind
from
of-
any Vermont
yeah.
constitutional scholars to tell us so we can look at,
Mm-hmm,
because there's a
Mhm.
lot of good things I like to do,
mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure the Constitution is the place for it.
Who, I mean, is Peter Teachout, would people say, our go-to on any constitutional matter?
He is pretty much our first
Okay.
constitutional go-to.
Okay. Who has the quickest route to him? I mean, you, yeah,
Yesterday,
Okay.
another constitutional amendment.
okay.
Go for it.
I think I've seen.
Want it?
I'll give
golly.
him a call
Yeah,
today.
yeah, well, I mean, I think we could move things around that morning to hear from him.
If he
So-
wants to-
If he's available, I don't
I don't know
know.
if he's
If,
teaching.
right, if someone wants to step out and leave him a message or call him.
I'll step out, I'll leave him a message.
Mhm.
I'm also share perhaps
Sure.
some of the same concerns about this. And
Right,
I guess perhaps legislative council may be able to address
yeah.
at least one of my concerns,
Yeah.
but you know, I share.
Mhm.
Senator Marshall.
Well, we put possible vote to kind of yield, you know, any final concerns that we need to iron out.
Yeah, okay.
Why, we can get Damien in the witness chair, he's next anyway, while you go out and
Alright.
call, and then, you know.
Then Magog came in. Why don't, at the same time, why don't you email him, just Teachout at vermontlaw.edu.
Thank you.
Write that down.
Any particular time you look at, depending on his availability.
We'll move anything around,
Right.
okay, yeah, and anything is movable before, well, we have all till noon, we have till noon, right, today.
You guys have to start until noon too, so there's, you could just.
I hope we, yeah, are we letting you go for
Just
any
tell-
of that? Okay.
You're letting me go for half an hour. which
Oh,
I
we're
really
so
do
charitable,
appreciate.
yeah,
Okay.
Which half an hour?
when we do cash. Oh, cause you, well, you are doing all those other bills, so to be fair.
I am, so you could literally have me talk about something else, if you need me to.
Okay. Do you wanna ask the?
No, I just wanted to respond to the treasurer and just say thank you for being here, and we've had a lot of stories and anecdotes, and I just am aware of that in my just experience. And it's great to have data, and I didn't know until your testimony that the federal government had actually looked at the impact, the financial impact of bargaining. And so that's just hugely helpful.
It
So
is.
thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for letting me testify.
thanks, Treasurer, we'll let you go.
Keisha, on one
Good luck.
75.
Thanks.
From some of the businesses, like Casella,
So
that,
Magali's reached out to Aaron Segrist and others. She hasn't heard back, but
she may be
We-
checking with the people.
I said informally on that bill, we're still gonna negotiate against ourselves. Rick is gonna bring in exemptions that exist in other states, and we'll consider them for their common sense
Okay,
and keep trying to get the witnesses to show up, but I imagine we do need some exemptions, and
yeah.
that we could,
Workers alone at night,
Right.
convenience stores
Yeah.
with cash are frequently held up.
Yes.
at-
We're talking about dinner.
we're talking about that's the cash.
I just wanna
Right.
make sure that
Yeah.
we hear from the people who are affected.
Well, Chris, are you here for the constitutional amendment?
No.
Oh, okay.
Asheville.
Cash, okay.
Oh, we're not
There
gonna
you
do
go.
cash bill for a
So
while.
that's in a little while.
Perfect.
Damien, can we get you in the witness chair? And Magali, let us know if Shannon gets on it. Feelings what? We may or may not, we may return to this
Yeah.
issue if, you know, we'll keep it fluid.
Good morning. For the record, I'm David Leonard in the Office of Legislative Counsel, and since we're talking about UVM affiliations this morning, my wife was an adjunct professor in anthropology at UVM several years ago, so there we go.
Yes.
And you're wearing pale green It looks like.
I
Oh my
am,
goodness.
although I can't say I bleed green and gold.
Right.
Yes, Rochester blue and dandelion yellow, yes, but green and gold, I'm sorry.
Wait, okay. Where'd you go to school?
University of Rochester.
Okay, I was like, I feel like a lot of schools are blue and yellow, but
Yes.
but
it's
Rochester
very-
blue is a specific.
There are a lot of green and.
Yeah. And dandelion yellow,
Yeah, dandelion yellow.
yeah, that's very, very important.
Oh,
even though-
my color trumps them all.
I mean, I don't know what the colors were.
Are you talking about the color that Damien and I are both wearing?
Maroon?
No, crimson.
Crimson, those are not crimson.
Yeah, definitely not.
Even this is not really crimson, but
It's
it's.
something in between these two.
Red,
Okay.
that is hard.
Now that
It
we've
is not.
completely derailed ourselves.
Anyway.
Red.
Let's talk about Proposition 3. So. On that note, so I have submitted an updated draft of Proposition 3 to the committee.
Yes,
The,
we have it, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
workplace island.
Okay.
yeah, and so the highlighted version you have in front of you. What we've done there is we've deleted the requirement, that they may require, or the language requiring, allowing a union to require dues payments or to collect dues from its members, excuse me. So that's the only change from the initial, version of Prop 3.
What, can we ask?
Yeah, why don't we start
Yeah.
asking questions and probing any language?
So you delete,
Did you remember that?
So that was the change that was requested the last time we heard this, bill.
Okay,
So let me pull up the original version.
Happy to talk.
And then, so the concerns with that were, there have been a couple of decisions now of the Supreme Court, which have prohibited public sector unions from collecting what's called the agency fee. Or fair share fee, there are a variety of terms for them, but the agency fee was ruled to be unconstitutional compelled speech in the public sector arena. And so in order to avoid any possible claims that this is constitutionally permitting the agency fee, which would be unconstitutional under the US Constitution, that language was just removed. So.
okay, can I ask another question?
Yeah, you can ask them.
So, and sorry if we went over this already, is it not collecting the fee at all or not collecting the fee from folks who are not members?
So this language here that was deleted says that a labor organization chosen to represent a group of employees shall have the right to collect dues from its members.
Okay, from its members.
Yeah, so agency fee was traditionally was collected from non-members who were represented by the union, and it was supposed to be limited to the cost of representation of the union, so costs for administering the contract, representing grievances,
that.
et cetera. But it couldn't pay for political activity. The US Supreme Court found that individuals who object to unions on political or religious grounds, for them being compelled to pay that fee, to compelled speech by the state government. And so they found that that was unconstitutional. There is fees like this still exist in the private sector arena, but differences between public sector where the public employer on behalf of the government is requiring it versus the private employer where it's private rights to contract and work.
Okay,
So it's private employers have a lot more leeway around political issues and so forth, which we discussed a little bit
that's true.
in the captive audience meetings
Right.
context. Again, private employers could have a meeting where they introduce you to their preferred candidate for Congress. That would be definitely not allowed in a public sector workplace unless you're actually working for that candidate. So for example, here at the legislature, we're nonpartisan staff requiring us to meet with, Senator Welch or Senator Welch's opponent. Because that's who the director likes in the next election would be, that would be unconstitutional.
Great.
So
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
we did pass agency fee.
we did, they're still on the books. It's what we would call a sleeping statute. So there's a healthy debate in legal circles as to whether the Supreme Court actually strikes down a statute, so strikes it from the books, or whether they simply say that that's not enforceable under our current interpretation of the Constitution. So what a lot of states have done is left unconstitutional provisions on the books in the event that the Supreme Court changes its view at some point in the future. Simply don't enforce them. This came when the Dobbs decision came down. I think you probably heard some news about states around the country that had abortion bans from before Roe v. Wade that then sprang back to life. They left them on the books, and so that's something that states do. Is they do leave things on the books. It's really a policy decision for the legislature. So right now, no union in the state would enforce that provision and no court would uphold it. But it's on the books should the law ever change. So, or should the Supreme Court's holding ever change? Okay. So, and that one is, that's an interesting one because at one time agency fees were allowed by the Supreme Court precedent. And they reversed themselves several decades later in a recent series of decisions. So that's where you're at with that.
On the shelf.
On the shelf, it's in the books, but it is
In the
not
book, on the
enforced.
shelf.
Any other questions for Damien looking through the language?
No,
I do. And, so, Senator Cummings gave her union notified, so we get mine. I remember as a very young child, probably 7, 8 years old, going with my grandfather to the union hall once a week. As he was a member of the United Steelworkers Union, and he was a rodman doing construction work for many years. He got that job in the late 30s, and he got my father a job before he went into the army. He was a laborer, same union, before he went and finally got a law degree under the GI Bill afterwards. That was a time in which African Americans couldn't get jobs,
right.
particularly jobs that paid well. And the union job paid well. And he retired from that union after I don't know how many years, and it provided a pension for his family, for his wife, and so on through his old age. And so the union did a great deal by family, and something that I don't forget. Looking at the language, the one concern that I have is the last sentence at the top of page 3. Page 2, rather, referring to the agreement between the employer and the labor union representing the employer's employees that requires membership in the labor organization as a condition of employment. Let's say you have a company that has a group of employees and the company unionizes based on majority vote of the employees. If there's an employee in that company that declines to join the union and membership is required, what happens to that employee?
So I'm glad that you asked this question or asked me to look into this a few minutes ago so that I could figure out the answer here. So under US Supreme Court precedent, those employees have what are called BEC rights, which is named for Communication Workers of America, the BEC. And essentially, under the National Labor Relations Act, the employers are, so first, the act does not preclude an employer from making an agreement with the union to require membership in the union as a condition of employment within 30 days after the employee is hired. However, there is a second clause that limits the employer's rights there to dismiss the employee, saying no employer shall justify any discrimination against an employee for non-membership in labor organization. If he has reasonable grounds for believing that the membership was not available on the same terms or conditions generally applicable to other members, or reasonable grounds for believing that membership was denied or terminated for reasons other than the failure to tender periodic dues and the initiation fees in the membership. And then they went on to say that that permits an employer and a union to enter into what's called a union security agreement or a union shop agreement to require all employees to become union members. But the membership can be whittled down to what's called its financial core, resulting in employees in the shop who only pay, similar to the agency fee, the costs of the representation. They don't pay any political or other costs. So they're allowed to not be members, but they have to pay
The union dues.
they have to pay that agency fee portion of the union dues. There is also an exception for individuals who have a religious objection to membership in the union. And this I'm taking from the National Labor Relations Board. An employee may object to union membership on religious grounds, but in that case must pay an amount equal to dues to a non-religious charitable organization in lieu of the union dues. So those are the two options there. What that clause is addressing are so-called right to work laws, which have been adopted in 27 states. And they do preclude these agreements. And so this is getting at that issue. So there is possibility for employers to require membership, but individuals who object for political or religious reasons or any reason at all to joining the union can become the so-called core members, where they just pay the core costs of representation. They don't actually pay full.
Are they considered members of the union? And I'm thinking, just looking specific to the language that's contained in the amendment. So it would seem to they don't seem to be members in the full sense of the word.
Yeah, they're known as objectors and they're not considered full members, but they are required to be protected by the union contract.
But this language says they have to be members. I'm wondering if this language is appropriate in constitutional amendment, if it runs counter to federal law.
The relationship is between the employer and the labor organization, not the individuals.
So this is saying that the state shall not adopt a law that prohibits the execution of an agreement between the employer and the union that requires membership in the labor organization. And the National Labor Relations Act provides that nothing in the act precludes the employer from actually entering into that agreement with the union. So the federal law and the language in the amendment are not contrary to each other. So it basically says that nothing in federal law precludes that agreement. And then the amendment says that the state can pass no law that prohibits such an agreement as a condition of between an employer and a union. So
And
that's basically what we're
Interfering
seeing.
with engage or diminishing rights. So the state can't do it, but the federal government effectively,
If
the
the-
National Relations Act has.
Well, so they say you can enter into a union shop agreement.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court has said that has to be viewed in the context of this other provision here that says you can't discriminate against non-members. And so,
It's basically what, at least as you've explained it, it precludes forcing someone to become a member. They may have to pay dues and have certain responsibilities on the national level, but you can't force them to become a member.
yeah,
And I'm wondering if the language here is sufficiently clear in that regard, or should it be?
so
can I just say sort of, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, a literal reading of this means that they aren't gonna, if we just said and a labor organization representing the employer's employees, that isn't sufficient enough based on the precedent that exists, is what you're saying, Damien, like, we couldn't end the sentence. I mean, obviously, we wanna make sure it's the labor organization that's actually representing people. But maybe tell us why it requires lines 2 and 3.
Sure, so, so that language here, so this is basically to prohibit the state from passing a right to work law, which could prohibit these agreements. So, so 27 states have banned the union security agreements and right to work laws, and this is prohibiting Vermont from passing a right to work law.
That's kind of the
So
clarity.
That's what this language is
That's
doing.
right.
That helps a lot.
So you're still under our,
That's not fair.
When you said 13 states, I thought I knew what you might mean, but
right, and so
Right.
under Supreme Court precedent, we cannot require non-members of the union in the public sector to pay union dues. And you cannot require them to join the union. So that would trump this language for all of your public sector union employees, municipalities at the state. In the private sector, under existing law, they are allowed to have a union security or union shop agreement. But what they are not allowed to do is to fire people for not joining the union, so long as they pay these core dues.
But when I'm reading this, and the issue of the interpretation, no law that prohibits the application of an agreement between the employer and employee that requires membership in the labor organization as a condition to employment.
But that, so if it, in our normal state statute, we'd say as defined in such and such, and the definition of that based on precedent doesn't mean the labor organization only represents members. It's an agreement with the labor organization, and the labor organization has, precedented responsibility to negotiate all of those things fairly for anyone who is, represented by them, whether or not they're considered a full member.
Yeah, I think the language is written to line up with the federal law. So the federal law says nothing in this subchapter or any other statute of the United States shall preclude an employer from making an agreement with a labor organization to require as a condition of employment membership therein on or after the 30th day following the beginning of employment or the effective date of the agreement, whichever is later. And then it says, provided further that no employer shall justify any discrimination, and that's the language I read to you earlier. And the court basically interpreted that to say, yes, you can require membership, but no, you can't require them to pay full dues.
And that really is the question, is does it say membership or does it say pay dues to the organization? There's nothing that I've heard that says they can require membership. That's not what I heard.
Yeah, and so what this is saying, so what the amendment in front of you is saying is the state shall not adopt any law that prohibits the application or execution of an agreement between an employer that requires membership in the labor organization as a condition of employment. And it's taking that federal language there that says to require as a condition of employment membership therein or in the union on or after the 30th day of employment. And it's taking that language and tracking it. So things that you could consider if you wanted to clarify the language is you could add in words such as, and I'm not sure that we actually do this in our constitution. In a statute, I would say consistent with federal law.
Right, right.
You can't. I don't think-
None of it, exactly. I think it's
Yeah,
kind of,
so,
yeah.
you know, you've got,
It's assumed that our constitution is under federal law, like I just.
right, the federal constitution and the
Yeah.
federal statutes are supreme to our constitution.
Right, right.
If they speak on it, they
Yeah,
trump. So we already have language that says no law shall be adopted that interferes with, negates, or diminishes the rights of employees to collectively bargain. And then the question really is this language here, which is specifically targeted at the right to work laws.
Mhm.
Whether that's already covered in the first
I'm fine with
clause.
the intent. I'm concerned about the
But-
language
Language
and
is
the
what you-
unintended consequences and the conformance with federal law. And I did have a conversation, by the way, with Professor Teachout, and unfortunately, he had a class starting in 10 minutes that went past noon, and he's going to Italy tonight or tomorrow for a week.
No.
He would happy to testify when he comes back, which will be in a week. And one of the things that I specifically asked him is, would it be appropriate, would it be useful, would it be important for us to speak with a constitutional law expert before passing this? He said he thought that would be a good idea.
And I am not a constitutional.
Right,
expert.
you're
I
doing.
know.
Certainly not on the
Yeah.
level of Professor
No,
Teachout.
Right.
So we
And it's not that he would necessarily disagree with this,
Yeah.
but he
So
did
Will,
want.
I just wanna say, since we had just a quiet conversation, I accept that. I think we wanted to use this possible vote to draw out any final concerns. So we should talk to him and confirm that after he's back from Italy, he can look through this and feel comfortable the week after.
And
There are
the
other
other thing is we can write in.
Okay, I asked if there was a recommendation made.
Well, and I would always start with Peter, but there are other constitutional scholars, we've already are in conversation with one of them. With Rod, with the president,
Oh,
who was the other constitutional scholar,
Okay.
In the law school.
the new president, yeah.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, he's a whiz on, his
Yeah.
expertise is First Amendment, but he is closer to
Right.
just constitutional law at all.
well, I'll just, I don't know, I don't wanna speak out of turn, but when we asked him about another bill,
We did.
my sense from his email was that he didn't feel comfortable stepping into legislative issues the way Professor Teachout might, who's used to coming and speaking, so I
And
didn't.
Obviously, I spoke with Professor Teachout about
Exactly.
another amendment.
Yeah, right.
My contact, and he was very helpful to us.
We can pass this at any point in the legislative session, we do need to give the House time to consider it.
Right,
So
we
we
were,
do not-
yeah,
Well,
This
we
is not
have the
subject.
week after
Exactly.
town meeting day,
I
we've
know.
got the week.
We are
Right.
not subject to crossover.
but we will honor crossover, I mean,
I'm just
we'll
saying.
try to do it the week
It's
after
fine for
because the
everybody.
speakers asked for equal amount of time. So we were trying to, give both, draw out any last concerns and give the House equal time, but
Sure.
we can accomplish that the
We
week
can do
after
that.
crossover.
Absolutely.
I just wanna make
And to
sure,
clarify this, I mean, I'm fine with the rest of the bill, because,
Yeah.
but I think this is a point that needs clarification.
just so I don't forget logistically, should Magali now follow up
Yes.
with Professor Teachout to schedule him for the week after?
The minute he's
Okay.
back and refreshed and speaking Italian, probably, we'll have to have an interpreter. Or either that or we have to learn Italian.
I'll just say, we should move on, and if we know we're not voting this out, we should, move on to our other topics of the day. What the word that seems to be really important to me here is on line 1, representing. This labor organization is representing, all of the employees, and then this language follows federal precedent and makes it extremely clear, what kind of labor organization we're talking about, but the labor organization is going to be representing non-members regardless.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing Senator Brock say,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, is that because of the ruling with public sector unions where you can't require membership,
Mhm.
and then because of the back language where they're members but not full members,
Mhm.
whether this needs to be clarified in a way that's better reflects that issue because
Mhm.
so
I think as a suggestion to expedite this, perhaps David, you and I could work on constructing an email to Professor Teachout, in which we can set the question clearly in terms of what we're looking for an answer to, and then he has a chance to look at it and would expedite his ability to perhaps testify on that.
I'm happy to
And
help with that.
If you're okay, either copying me or someone
Sure.
like David Mickenberg, I think maybe there's a national labor attorney who could also weigh in, Professor Teachout seems to weigh in on everything constitutional, but
Well,
like a labor
bear-
attorney
bear in
as
mind,
well.
The Constitution we're talking about is the Vermont Constitution, not
Right.
the US Constitution.
Right,
And so we need an expert who has
right, but if this language has national implications, we could just about,
if it does.
Well, and because there's been
Yeah.
a Supreme Court ruling.
Right,
in this
right, right.
particular,
Yeah.
And if you could just please ask him to look at the whole bill, I mean, I'm sure he would
Right,
anyway, not just.
yeah, right. Okay, so we're flagging that, that's,
And thank you for your flexibility.
oh yeah, it says possible vote for that reason, in case that wasn't clear,
And his week away is the perfect week away, so.
yeah.
It's
Right.
happily
He has
this
some
year.
light reading on the plate.
Oliver and I benefit from this too, because happily this year, the law school and the state house have the same holiday week.
Well,
Oh, nice.
Town meeting week.
Can you convince the schools to do that?
I know. Next, we have to
Great.
do this.
Um,
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
useful?
it would be.
A unified calendar is, right, a unified school calendar that coordinated with the state house.
should
Yes.
we understand why workplace is
So the
highlighted? lower
workplace
here?
was just highlighted
Yeah.
to show you where I made the
Where he
deletion.
deleted the rest of.
Yeah, it's not actually a new word. It
Oh.
was just,
Okay,
I just highlighted it to show you where the language was. That
Interesting.
came out, because it's really hard to show the negative.
right.
So I just highlighted workplace and the period, because there used to be another clause between that word and period.
Thank you.
So that's it. That's just a Damienism. I do that for our editors to say, this is where I made a deletion.
This is a clue. Search more.
Right, well, for the editors, it tells them to go back to make sure that I
Had to leave this
updated
whole
my
thing.
punctuation and grammar to make the sentence tell you
Okay.
well if it's a list.
Got it. Thank you.
So, yeah, great,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Damien.
I'll see you in half an hour,
Yeah,
or less, I guess.
well,
Well,
Half an hour?
take your half an hour, we'll figure.
Great,
figure
thank
that
you.
out. Rick,
Yes.
get you in witness chair.
what Valerie will be able to get.
Sorry.
She just.
Okay. Jay, just checking to see, do you have like a significant time constraint? Because it's gonna be we're gonna have some back and forth with Rick, but we could just hear you first since you're kind of supporting the overall spirit of the bill. If you'd like to do that.
Jay is still channeling winter.
Yes, good morning, Chair Ram Hinsdale. Thank you for having me. I am available until I have my next meeting of the day is at 11:30 a.m. So I'm happy to stay on the Zoom call here until the committee is ready to hear from me, as long as I can finish by 11:30 a.m.
Yeah, I hope you can, because we have other things to do. So it might be beneficial for you to hear this back and forth, since, we'll probably think about the possibility of exemptions to right now what is a pretty broad policy change, so policy requirement. So why don't we then have Rick sort of share with us, but what I asked Rick to do, folks, is share some other exemptions that exist in other states where they've clearly thought about these same issues. We have reached out to our own Vermont stakeholders and we have not heard back yet. So thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick Sagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. By the way, I have committee at 10 o'clock. I can probably push that a little bit.
Oh, well, good. So then we're, sorry, I
Yes,
didn't.
I was
know
just gonna say,
Oh, good. Yeah, you
So-
got the.
but I can probably push that a little bit past that,
Okay.
because I love this committee so much.
We love it.
Okay, so S-175, very, very, very short bill.
Mhm.
The walkthrough won't take long. 2466D is added, leaving Title 9.
We have a copy somewhere and he has it up.
It's super short. I mean, I know we can.
When we
pull it
went
up.
through all those bill introductions, we did have Magali printed out, so I can
Yeah.
find mine and.
I'll find it. I just wanted to
Yeah.
sort of have it in front of me. So give us one fact
Sure.
to see if we can locate it.
Files.
It's right here, it's here. It's in the last week's file.
Right.
Catch money.
Got
Here's mine.
it. Massachusetts and Connecticut is what I have written.
Yes.
And we'll look at both of those states, how they've done this. Okay, so cashless businesses prohibition, subsection A seller or lessor who offers goods or services to consumers shall not refuse to accept cash as a method of payment unless the transaction exceeds $1,000. B, a person who violates this section commits an unfair practice in commerce in violation of section 2453 of this title. That's the deceptive trade and practices section. That is my walkthrough. That's 175.
Right.
Oh, it takes effect July 1st, 2024.
It's literally one page.
Yes. So I think maybe you all are aware of some issues that this bill as written would present. A seller or lessor doesn't really exclude much. It would include online. It would include over the telephone if people still buy things over the telephone.
Cash online.
Yeah, right.
That's interesting.
So some states have used the word retail, I think for the most part means in-person transactions, but you probably still want to define retail as an in-person transaction.
I think these days you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we have so much online retail.
Right. I think it'd be beneficial. I will give you,
For the purpose of this law, I mean, I wouldn't wanna, I don't know if we wanna redefine retail. Because we have we have tax implications of that, so.
But
Yeah.
we happily benefit. from
just
it.
for this, but it would just be for this section.
Okay.
Yeah, retail is defined in this
Right.
section, yeah, would be.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts took the simple route, and this is their cashless bill. In their statutes, basically no retail establishment offering goods or services shall discriminate against a cash buyer by requiring the use of credit by a buyer in order to purchase such goods and services. All retail establishments must accept legal tender when offered as payment by the buyer. So, yeah, they do include retail, which to them means in person, but they don't have the $1,000 exception. And really, that's the only exception they have is
Yeah.
it must be retail.
Retail meaning in person.
But it says
Yes.
requiring the use of credit. So there's things that are not cash and not credit.
So I get a check, is that what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or a debit
That's
card.
considered cash. A
Yeah,
check is
yeah,
considered cash.
But a debit card
I
shouldn't be considered cash. When we say cash, we
I
mean
think debit
actual.
is considered
actual-
credit.
It's considered cash.
I don't know. I don't.
Hey, we
think
have
so.
Chris Delia right here.
So we probably want to define it, right?
Yeah, but well, let's state our intent. Is
Yeah.
the intent, what I understood was we're talking about actually
Legal
cash
Cash.
and
Right.
As it is traditionally understood,
Yes.
paper money.
Paper money,
Right.
paper money.
Right.
Connecticut
Fine.
gives us help in this regard.
So yeah,
It's
this
just-
is, this
Or
one's
in
not,
Massachusetts for now. it's not
Massachusetts
helpful.
is not as
Yeah.
helpful. We have Connecticut here. Connecticut
Okay.
is much more.
We
and
often do things like Connecticut does, because they're good at writing this down the same way.
Interesting.
So they define retail,
Yeah.
includes any retail transaction conducted in person, excluding by telephone,
There you
mail,
go.
or the internet.
Yeah,
And they also include for parking at a parking lot or a parking garage.
right.
And, because I assume those are mostly automated. Or-
No,
Or danger.
don't assume
No,
that.
well.
excluding.
Well, they,
Well, it
I
could,
mean, it's both.
yes, and it could
Right.
also be
the
that,
cash window is closed at the end.
Right.
yeah,
It,
And that-
it does frustrate people that you can't pay with coins
Yeah.
and then you
Right.
now.
And we
Um,
still can in Woodstock, so if you like that, come to Woodstock.
C, at a wholesale club that sells consumer goods and
It's all
services
in here.
through a membership
So
model.
Costco or somebody asked for it.
At Sam's Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna skip anything anymore. The Senator,
Right,
Senator
good,
Carson
yeah.
has held.
That's a good policy.
Exactly.
At for the rental of consumer goods, services, or accommodations for which posting of collateral security is typically required. Rent to own stores, maybe something like that. And for consumer goods or services provided exclusively to employees and individuals other than customers who are authorized to be on the employer's premises. Cash means legal tender.
And legal tender means paper money?
And coins.
Yes, it
Yeah.
means, yes, any type of US currency, per
All of
item,
it,
Mhm.
even pennies.
even pennies.
So
At first,
someone coming into a store and buying something for $29.95 could bring in a crate of pennies,
Correct.
and the person would have to accept it.
That does not break my.
Sometimes people do that.
Sometimes people do it,
Intentionally.
intentionally, absolutely.
Oh,
And the
well,
question
and
is-
sometimes they do it because they need to, or that's what they.
Understand.
I mean, I don't think we can attribute anything. I'm
No
not,
motivations.
right, I don't think we can
So
attribute.
we want to understand, can it happen?
Yeah.
And must a business accept that? That's the question.
yeah, so let me keep reading because I think you're correct, but so subsection B, a person selling or offering for sale goods or services at retail in the state shall not, one, refuse to accept cash as a form of payment for such goods or services. So I think you'd be correct there, Senator. Post signs stating that cash payment is not accepted. Or three, charge a customer paying cash a higher price than such customer would pay using any other form of payment. You think that they would charge them less?
Yeah.
Yes,
They
generally,
do,
But yeah,
generally you get a discount for
but
that
you
cash.
don't have to pay all the fees to the credit card.
and they have a
Can
similar,
I ask another question?
Mhm.
There's no limit in terms of using legal tender as the size of the legal tender. For example, a person buying a retail product that costs 50 cents could pay with a $100 bill, and the merchant would have to change that bill. Is that correct?
under the statute, yes, that's correct.
But given what is astonishing now in our real estate market is people are paying cash for houses. And that is even more gobsmacked
And
to
you
me.
get
They
a
have
visit from the
Right.
FBI when you.
But they do it
The
with
real
wire
doesn't-
transfer.
Right, it's more of a debit
I
transaction.
know, but it's still
Yeah.
just amazing.
But you can't pay cash with a $100 bill at Dunkin' Donuts, because
Right,
they won't accept it.
Right,
right.
So, but
And
one
that feels
question,
always
speaking of the
cash.
house issue, one question is, do we wanna keep the $1,000 limit that was in the original bill, because that doesn't exist in Connecticut?
I wouldn't bother with it.
well, my concern
this
is
is
about employee safety. The example that Dr. Perchlik and I have gotten emails about is when you go to the transfer station on Saturday morning, they don't take credit cards.
So that's not retail, is that defined as retail? Did you figure that out?
I'm paying a fee I'm being charged to dump my garbage, I would assume.
We would need to define retail. And
We would need to define, it doesn't exist.
because I think it'd be vague. If you just use the word retail without defining retail, I think it could include what has been discussed.
Okay.
It- Yeah,
They define
If you
retail,
have an employee in an isolated location or alone at night in a convenience store, which frequently gets held up. It's difficult to get employees under that. And if they are required to keep a certain amount of cash, because if you come in with $100 bill, I've gotta have enough change to do that. And it's nice until we can't get anybody to man the transfer station or the convenience store at night.
so we won't, I mean, that's not unfortunately a Rick question, we won't pass this until we hear from Aaron Segrist. Either way, if they have concerns or not, I wonder if Chris wants to say something.
Or someone else, or
We have
one
contacted
somebody-
Casella as well.
Okay, 'cause they're the ones
But
that have been-
also, we could address that if we,
Casella, Killington, and Sugar Bush.
Okay, we contacted Casella, Killington and Sugar Bush.
why are they leaving Sugar Bush?
I don't remember. Oh,
They,
The ski areas.
Oh, because
they no longer
They
take
no
cash.
longer
They
take
no
cash.
longer take it.
Right.
So, to the concern of your late night thing, we could also talk about hours, because
Yes.
it does strike me that it would be fair
Mhm.
in those kinds of circumstances
Remote
for
Right.
location.
a location and time.
Right,
So I think we can carve out some exceptions to make that work.
right, I agree, yeah,
Thieves will start to work days. They will start to change their behavior.
Well, that'll be helpful.
It's easier to
It'll
catch.
keep them in broad daylight, Randy.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think it's just, I think that's a useless act, quite frankly.
I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, I do too.
Can I show the committee the Colorado version? Just
Great,
one-
yeah.
One more example.
Yeah,
oh,
Colorado, this is.
Yes, wait, look, can I just respond to Randy? I think people hate being surprised and unprepared. I mean, if you're in a place and you, I mean, so I think, I don't know, it's a present Oh, thank you.
Should I leave it right here?
Probably not, because somebody will kill themselves there. But why don't you, if you'd be kind enough to go stick it over by the recycle bin and we will.
I got something exciting.
Freedom and Unity from the cartoon, Center for Cartoon Studies.
Oh,
They've sent
okay.
out
Oh, great.
100 copies. So
Yeah.
let's get them out
I was
to our.
hoping it was a kid.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know, I was like,
That would
I'm
be-
on the box like that. Move on.
I was hoping for Girl Scout cookies.
What were you hoping for?
Sorry, Rick.
It's okay.
Colorado, we're back to Colorado.
Back to Colorado. So they also define retail, as offering goods or services for sale. Hold on, that they're kind of giving an overview first, including Federal Reserve notes from a buyer to purchase the goods or services. This section applies to a retail establishment only if the establishment has an individual accepting payment in person for the goods and services being offered. That's another way, that's an interesting way to define it.
yes.
That's the toll booth at night, either
Right.
stick in your credit card, they'll send you a letter or something.
And consider with the automation of things happening more and more, that you may have more checkouts that are just, there's no person there accepting payment.
That's kind of like the parking
Right.
issue.
Yes.
On the other hand, all those machines at the grocery stores take dollar bills.
Right.
Just saying.
This section does not apply to a retail transaction in which the retail establishment requires a security deposit be placed on a credit card or a credit card number be provided to cover unforeseen damages or expenses. Hotel, I assume, sorry, I'm assuming things. Subsection C, this section does not apply to a retail establishment that uses the device to convert a consumer's cash into a prepaid card, allowing the consumer to complete the transaction at the retail establishment.
That's more like the ski areas, I
Oh,
think.
but if it doesn't have a fee.
Oh, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah,
I like that. So
so
you can't create a pay card system where you're
Yes,
earning
that
money
is
from someone.
so important.
I like that, yes.
So it does not include a fee, it does not require minimum deposit greater than $1. On request, the consumer is provided with a receipt indicating the amount of cash onto the card.
You know what that would actually, a lot of colleges make you put a $5 deposit down to get something like a CAT card, like to pay for
Mm.
printing, et cetera, which I think is nothing, but.
Right, and that
Yeah.
could be good revenue for them, especially when people lose them.
Right,
Oh, that's
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, not greater than a
but
dollar.
it's not fair.
It's not fair, yeah.
The underlying,
Maybe we might say greater than the cost of the card or something, but anyhow, yeah.
We don't have to take this is Colorado.
No, but I do like that because I don't think it's fair to always charge people for these cards that they're required.
so there's no expiration date on the card, and there's no limit on the number of transactions on the card. This section does not apply to a bank or a credit union.
Not important.
I think that's maybe why Chris is here.
A retail establishment with more than one point of sale at a single address complies with this section if it accepts US currency, including Federal Reserve notes, at no fewer than one point of sale at the address. So I guess the grocery stores where you have some checkouts
Right,
with cashiers.
You gotta have a card.
But again, they usually accept cash, as Senator Clarkson indicated. Failing to accept US currency from a buyer as required by subsection 1 is a class 2 petty offense, and it's a fine of not more than $250 per transaction or attempted transaction. So,
Okay, so Colorado's like our Goldilocks, just right, maybe.
And Colorado has ski
Yeah, I
lots
like
of ski
it.
resorts.
I like-
Ski
yeah.
resorts own our ski
Right,
resorts,
and lots
so
of
they
rural
make-
areas. Yeah, yeah,
We have not covered employee safety yet.
No, we haven't.
right.
No, it's on the list.
So that- I think we can address with time of operation and. What else did we say? Location.
Location, involves location.
so Senator Brock's concerned about the, limiting the, if it's $1,000 is currently in the bill, something to think about. If you want to have some provision for the amount of change that if you pay, $100 bill for 99 cents, it could be under the way, if we write it a certain way, that could be an issue for the seller. They cannot make change.
Right, right,
Should they be held accountable?
right.
But they can say that.
But the law would need to give them an out.
Allow them to say that.
And I know banks, sorry, Chris, but banks no longer count your change. And I assume that if you're depositing change, they'll accept it. But yeah, even in hundreds of thousands of pennies.
Mhm.
But they will not count your change, which is really frustrating. I mean, many banks no longer don't have change
The
machines
machines,
anymore,
yeah.
which is very frustrating for children who whose allowance still comes in quarters. Just saying.
Any other questions for Rick right now?
Fix that.
We're obviously running a little behind time. Quickly, Chris, if you'd like to.
I was here more to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, would
but,
you identify yourself?
Sure, sorry. Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. This cuts two ways in the marketplace. You've
Mhm.
got the rural folks who are out there, cash on hand, prime target for the perpetrators out there.
Mhm.
But then again, you've got individuals who live in rural communities that are very limited in
Right,
their options for
Right.
shopping.
Right.
That if you have somebody out there who doesn't accept cash and the nearest place is 10 miles down the road,
Mhm.
it's problematic for the consumer.
Right.
From our point of view, cash is cash. A debit card is not credit, to answer your question. Credit is when you're extending money out there for a period of time and you're gonna pay that back.
So what is a
card-
debit card considered?
A debit card is used as a cash transaction on your account.
Right.
Swipe it at the machine, your money's in the account,
Right.
comes out of the account when there's reconciliation at the end of the day, but it's not an extension of credit.
So I think
Right.
we agree we don't like the Massachusetts model.
Right.
And the other states define it as legal tender. They're saying cash is cash.
Yeah.
So we're ignoring the Massachusetts model.
But I like aspects of both Connecticut and Colorado,
Yes.
so I'd like to actually see them printed out so I can then think.
Well, and you don't need urging to take debit cards.
Right, I just think
So-
we need to
so we don't
ignore,
need to
yeah, we're
worry
just talking
about
about cash
Right,
transaction.
right.
So Rick, why don't, for now, people can disagree and we can figure it out, but I think it sounds like if you could combine the Connecticut and Colorado models, and if there are decisions to be made where they contradict each other.
Yeah.
Please, add both option, but then we'll look at all the exemptions they have and see which one we want to keep, just so we're looking at something in our statutory framework that.
Do you want to keep $1,000 cap in our bill? This does not exist in the others you have seen.
I go around.
I don't have, I would ask Chris actually if he has an opinion on that,
For a retailer.
or a retailer maybe.
On having to accept cash up to $1,000. I don't, I mean, that's really the real retailer's
Mhm.
decision.
Okay.
I'll
That's
also
why I-
share with you, my daughter and her husband own a small market in our town. So when I'm down there working with them from time to time, I see this. You'd be surprised at how many people come in early in the morning to buy a cup of coffee with still cash.
Yeah.
So it's very much
I
a,
just cash all the time. It's
Yeah.
great.
so.
Well, if we can't get the retailers writ large and your daughter wants to come testify, we certainly want to talk to a small business if the retailers are.
We tried, credit cards didn't allow you to set a limit. And get down to the pack of candy, it costs more than a store
Yeah.
to pay the credit card than the.
Right.
But we allow,
We dealt with that in
Yeah,
Vermont
yeah,
statute
yeah.
a few years ago when you gave the retailers the ability to say transactions less than $5 was the cutoff
Mhm.
that we put in statute.
Yeah.
and it's posted a lot
Right.
in lots and lots of.
And
And
often
they
what
could
it
provide they could provide a discount if somebody came
Right.
in with cash.
And, they can charge an extra fee if you're making a small
Correct.
transaction with a credit card. So
Usually-
many people don't have cash
Correct.
anymore. But if they charge their 35 cents or whatever, you can
Right.
still do that.
But just for the record, the
Yeah.
threes are not tagged, the fees are not 3% all the time.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
robust negotiations in the market, so for my daughter, the fees are less than 1% on transactions.
Well, that's because she had you negotiate.
No, they didn't.
Fees that they pay to the card.
Processing credit card transactions is no different than keeping your lights on here. It's a cost of
Okay.
doing business.
So we
Right.
still have a
We
question on the
cannot
table.
negotiate with GMP about our prices, I'm sorry.
I do wanna keep
Well,
us
maybe we
moving, because we're gonna have other people start to
Yes.
come in. Do people wanna leave the $1,000 limit right now?
So I would leave it until we talk to the retailers, 'cause it's
Okay.
just a number, I mean, we can
Okay.
change it easily.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
500, it could be.
Okay, I hear more people saying that than not, so we'll leave the $1,000
I
limit.
wanna pay for my car.
Is there, do we wanna add something unique to us about how much change they like proportionally or something, or do we want to keep thinking about that?
I would be silent. Again, to go to Chris's point, I think it's really up to the retailer. I don't want us to hamstring too much.
And let's hear from them.
And let's hear from them. Okay, so do we so far agree on what we're asking Rick to do? We're asking him to do his best to combine Colorado and Connecticut and show us options, and leave the $1,000 limit.
And I think the location and time,
Yes.
that's our little Vermonty thing.
Right, I didn't know if we had language, it might
I don't
not
think we
too
do
long.
have language.
You don't, I
Yeah.
had suggested this to Anne for
Uh-huh.
her to respond to her concern about.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. Do you want to see Anne that language, or can we wait for the retailers?
We can
And
wait for
explore it?
retail.
Okay, so no one's forgotten that we want to see that, but let's not put it in the bill in a way that
I
we
mean,
don't.
you frequently see signs, no cash after 10. or,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you don't
Right.
wanna have a lot of cash sitting around.
I will say, I think it's hard to speak to location because we have some criminal activity in Burlington, that also makes people not wanna do cash transactions.
Right, no, but I mean,
Sometimes it
either for
hours it might
hours
be.
or
Yeah,
a remote location. I'm thinking of the,
right.
the
Yeah.
pickup station with Casella. You've
Right.
got one person out there.
Who can't make change easily or something.
Yeah, or
I know what you're
if they have to have cash on hand,
Mm-hmm.
they're just a sitting target for somebody out. Everybody goes to the dump on Saturday morning, so
Right.
Saturday afternoon, you show up and help them clean it
I
up.
guess one of the questions also to ask is this a problem that really needs solving?
Well,
The-
That was my.
The cash issue.
Yeah, is this a problem that needs solving? Is this the
Mm-hmm.
expensive government detailed requirements that we add to
I
this
will.
and the amount of cash and time?
I will say this is one of the things where we've had 3 or 4 very passionate people write to us and say, please do this. So that's 3 or 4 people.
That's 3 or 4 out of
But
600.
it's also like, we don't always get random people saying, I saw this bill and please do something. So people who do carry cash are pretty passionate about their freedom to, and there's people who just don't like cards. It's Vermont, there's just people who like,
Keep
keep their money under the mattress.
answer though that you
Yeah.
have is the merchant can decide, and if you don't like the merchant's policy, you'll go elsewhere.
But you
And
can't
that will
always
change
choose.
the merchant. If the merchant is losing business, they're not gonna continue to do business that way.
well,
Well,
we
the
did
detective
offer
track
some of
is
those
no
people the
alternative.
opportunity to testify the week after we get back, the people who are passionate about cash
And retailers, we need to hear.
and the
from
retailers.
Retailers.
So,
I like the consumer protection of the cards. The way
Yeah, I agree.
Colorado does.
yeah, no, but
Because
just the idea
ski
that,
resorts are hard.
yes,
Just go to an expert.
Commerce is looking for you. So
Yes.
we're gonna let Rick go and we're gonna let Jay speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
all.
appreciate
Thank you
that you
all.
found those other
Yeah.
things. And we'll schedule with Magali to get you back in the week after.
Randy, I should say that you can't always choose where you shop. I mean, you can't, it's not
Right,
always.
you could be at a gas station. Jay,
It could be in the middle.
Let's go to gas station.
Jay, yeah, okay, so we're gonna have Jay for a few minutes, and then we're gonna have to move on.
Good morning. Jay Green, I use they, them pronouns. I'm the policy and research analyst for the State of Vermont Office of Racial Equity. Thank you very much for accepting our testimony on this important bill. I will say that protecting the right to pay cash is one of the office's top policy priorities for this legislative session. And to discuss why, I'd like to talk about some recent data from the FDIC. And let me just pull up my letter of testimony here. This letter of testimony is on the committee's website in the S-175 bill documents. So the data I would like to provide sorry, let me back up. So our office is concerned with the data demonstrating that there are racial disparities in who has access to cashless forms of payment, like having a bank account or having a credit card. And I will point out that debit cards require you to have a bank account to draw those funds from. So they are not equivalent to cash for people who do not have access to a bank account. So I would not suggest that debit cards would be an appropriate workaround for allowing businesses to accept cash. So our office supports requiring retail businesses to accept cash payments of physical legal tender due to the documented racially inequitable state of access to banking services, credit cards, and other electronic payment methods. The FDIC, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, does a national survey of unbanked and underbanked households. And the most recent data from that is from the 2021 survey report. Unbanked means they define unbanked as, pardon me while I just pull up this definition, because I want to get it right for you. The FDIC defines unbanked people. Pardon me, I believe that they define it as no one in a household having access to a checking account at a credit union or a bank.
Sorry.
I'm happy to provide
Yeah.
a written copy of that data definition later, but
Everyone I mean, Jay, it's hard. I mean, their banks are on practically every other corner. It's hard to think about a household not having access to it. They may not be able to take advantage of it, but they have access to it.
yeah, so when
I
I
think
say access, I mean there are requirements to use a bank. Like some banks require you to maintain a minimum amount in your account, and you could be in an economic situation with your family where you're getting constant overdraft fees or not maintaining that minimum amount.
Right.
So
The other problem is that they're poor. They
Right.
don't have $200 to leave sitting in the bank. It's not that they don't have access
Yeah,
to banking,
just
they
access.
don't have enough money to put in the bank.
Yeah. And to maintain an account.
yes, precisely. Thank you. So
This is yes.
the concern with racial disparities comes in because the FDIC in 2021 found that, and I'm quoting from their summary of their report here, quote, differences in unbanked rates between Black and white households and between Hispanic and white households in 2021 were present at every income level. For example, among households with income between $30,000 and $50,000, 8% of Black households and 8.4% of Hispanic households were unbanked, compared to 1.7% of white households. So
Is,
Is that in your?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Wow.
correct. And from the FDIC's data for Vermont, the proportion of Vermonters who were unbanked increased from under 1% in 2019 to 2.5% of Vermonters in 2021. So there are a significant number of Vermonters who are unbanked. There are likely racial disparities in who is unbanked in Vermont. It's more likely to be a person of a household of color who is unbanked, a Black or Hispanic household. So our office is strongly in favor of making this legislation the most protective of unbanked and underbanked households that it can possibly be. And I'm sure that I would just encourage the committee to think about who we are protecting with this law, because I appreciate that retailers need to have their input on this, but for our office, it all comes back to protecting unbanked and underbanked households. Our office is concerned about the blanket $1,000 limit. To us, it seems kind of arbitrary. It's not present in any other state's definitions. In particular, it's fairly easy to purchase an item for over $1,000 in a single transaction. For example, a lot of mattresses are over $1,000. A single smartphone can be over $1,000. And those are both items that you can walk into a store and purchase. So it doesn't seem, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us why there would be $1,000 limit for the purpose of protecting unbanked and underbanked households. So our office is asking the committee to consider a version of this bill that produces the fewest exceptions possible to protect unbanked and underbanked Vermont households who are more likely to be households of color.
Thanks, yeah, that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, there is the reason for the bill.
Right, and yeah, so thank you so much for your testimony, and there's something that you wrote that you didn't mention, which is also compelling. Cash is a fail-safe form of payment that survives natural disasters like grid failures. And that is so true.
Yeah.
When a hurricane was pending in Florida, I would get cash.
Yeah.
Right,
And so if the retail establishments have moved away from cash, that's a real
Mhm.
problem after a disaster.
And we
Or
recommend it in
just
emergency preparedness to have cash.
Yes.
To get cash.
yes.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point.
Great.
And thank you for your
Thank you.
all of your testimony.
Yeah, thanks so
Really
much,
helpful.
Jay. This is really helpful.
Thank you very much for taking the testimony. And I wanted to respond to, and I apologize, I'm having a hard time seeing the senator who was speaking about waste transfer stations, but in my
And-
experience working, having to drop off recycling and other waste at waste disposal transfer systems, they tend to only be open during kind of normal business hours. They tend not to be open late at night. To my knowledge, I've never seen a waste transfer system that was open past about 5 p.m.
Oh, but they tend to be in remote locations. So if you have a lot of cash and you're in a place there where there's nobody else around, when you yell stop thief, then that increases your risk. And I'm not sure how to find that balance.
Well, but the time may help if we, we'll discuss it when we talk to retailers.
Yeah, and then I think we also should talk to municipalities because many of those transfer stations are done by towns.
Okay.
And then there's lots of transactions that
Like
towns do.
It's fairly hard to have a remote place with, if you're out where there's no internet connection and there's no, I do antique shows. I used to be able to have a little metal thing that I could do a card on. I couldn't verify until I got home and had a phone. But now it's harder to take anything but cash.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, the
Yeah.
Apple Pay is really easy. I mean, some things are easier and some things are harder,
Yeah,
but
right.
all depends on the internet. Right?
But we're gonna explore that further, Jay, time and location. I think that some of the location, it could be solved by setting time.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention that I have some relevant personal experience in terms of I noticed that I believe it was the Colorado statute had an exception for businesses that require a holding an amount on a credit card to like, for example, at hotels. I actually used to work as a front desk agent at 2 different hotels in New Hampshire and prior to graduating from graduate school. And we always had a policy of, both hotels I worked at had a policy of accepting a cash deposit of $200 instead in lieu of a credit card. I'm trying to think about, circumstances where people are in really desperate need of shelter and maybe have lost their credit card. The hotel may not have access to the internet because of a power outage in a natural disaster scenario. I think there are a lot of reasons to protect those kind of businesses, the customers of those kind of businesses' ability to use cash in a transaction.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I actually fell victim almost to a scam where I cashed a check for performing a wedding that wasn't real, and it locked my bank account for like a week. And it was like that week was everything became such a pain that I didn't realize would be such a pain. I like called them and begged them to like lift this,
So that's a good experience.
Yeah,
It's relevant.
it is. So thank you for reminding us of that. If someone could just get a card locked, that's really critical for them. Yeah, losing it.
it takes quite a while to cancel that one. After talking to 3 computers, I finally got to talk to a human. Can we change that? And, yeah, and then to go around and change where you've got a card registered takes a while.
Right.
And you are on cat.
Okay,
That's okay.
let's,
Yeah, so sorry if I'm sort of having back channel conversation here. We have an ambitious agenda today. And I think we also have a lot of flexibility tomorrow. And Damien graciously on these 2 issues is available tomorrow in case we don't have the vote today, in case we need to move any testimony from the people who are more generally around. But we've scheduled a lot of folks who we don't want to sort of, they've set aside time in their day already. So if we run into issues where we feel like we need more language changes and we're not voting on the EV bill anyway, we can have a more free-flowing discussion and move a lot of this to tomorrow where we have some flexibility. And I would like to try to take the basic needs budget vote today or tomorrow, just because I'd like to get a bill out so we can focus on
we'll have more
everything.
technical. in these,
Right.
so.
So Damien, you're welcome to get in the witness trip because all of our witnesses are remote, and I'll just go to our witnesses, but you're welcome to add in, thoughts on.
Work on bullshit.
Yeah, exactly,
Appreciate that.
exactly. That's a very, looks like torturous chair. I've never
It
actually
is
tried to
awful.
sit in it.
It's not that
Maybe we
awful.
should just get a pillow or something.
We need a cushion.
So that stay awake.
No,
Um, I
Question,
am, I think that our remarks from the Office of Racial
Oh, I'm
Equity are included if
Yeah,
you,
thank you so
I'm
much.
happy to stay on if you would like to continue to ask any questions, but otherwise I think I would take my leave.
Well,
What is the
We're
chair's
going
preference?
into we're going into more electric vehicle charging access for tenants, which I think is relevant. A lot of these programs that subsidize and benefit people to participate in environmental programming are limited to homeowners. But you're not prepared to speak to that, so you can stay on or you can leave. But we really, as Senator Harrison said, we appreciate the issues you've raised, and so that's helpful. Why we're doing this bill.
as always, Jay, you are invaluable and help us think fully around an issue, which I always appreciate your contribution. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that compliment. I appreciate it. And I actually do have these numbers off the top of my head because I was just testifying on a different bill in House Environment and Energy relating to housing. But I would remind the committee that Vermont has significant racial disparities in who owns their own home. About 28% of Black Vermonters own their own homes compared with 45% of Black Americans, United States residents. So, and that's compared to about 70% of white Vermonters owning their own homes. So Vermont is lagging behind the nation in terms of empowering Vermonters of color to own their own homes and instead of renting. And any regulations that you make regarding rentals are likely to affect more people of color proportionally. So thank you very
And what
much.
was that 45% nationally?
45% of Black home families own their homes nationally, compared with 28 or either 22 or 28% in Vermont was the most recent data from the.
But okay, I was
I just at some point would like to know if we have a breakout of people of color, because we're getting an awful lot of African refugees. So you are a person of color, but your ability to own your own home, like any group of refugees who have come through this country, is limited until you learn the language. If you're coming from tribal Africa, you have a lot of education and skill building before you work your way up to home ownership. And right now, nobody can afford their own home unless.
Well, that's a bigger topic,
Right,
but
but I mean,
it's,
there is a
Yeah.
difference
yeah.
between, if you look at white people,
Mhm.
you're gonna find recent immigrant groups
Yeah,
that have not made their way up the ladder yet.
Yes.
In economic.
so often when we look at policy through the lens of who's least well off and who has the least access, we make it better for everyone, so I think it's still always relevant to say who's the most left behind in the housing market. And if we make first generation opportunities available, we help renters afford things that build their wealth, then we help everybody, so, you know, it is the opposite
I'm
ratio.
not arguing.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm just saying like, this will end up benefiting everyone, but it's always important to remember, you know, who it could benefit the most.
Okay, so now we are shifting gears.
Yeah.
All together.
So I was kind of in the middle of saying, you know, we have an ambitious schedule, we have a lot of people we don't wanna reschedule for tomorrow. Damien does have availability tomorrow if we move more walkthrough or voting till tomorrow. So he's in the witness chair to sort of help us process these issues, but I'm gonna go to Angela Zykowski since we're behind and let her testify and lead. Do we have the other two people and they're just?
They're not.
Okay, so we might go back to Damien. Hi, Angela. Morning.
Hi, good morning.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Angela Zykowski. Long time no see.
Good morning, everybody. It has been a while.
Yeah.
So for the record, my name is Angela Zykowski, and I'm the director of the Vermont Landlords Association. We're a statewide trade organization for housing providers in Vermont. I'm also a practicing attorney, and I represent landlords in that private practice, primarily in evictions, but trained as a lawyer, so used to reading statutes and other things. I was asked to come in to comment on this bill, and in the initial request, one of the points that was specifically asked of me was what the current discourse is among housing provider community on this topic. And I think my report back is none. This is not something that's on the radar for housing providers. It's not something that they're dealing with. And I don't know if that's because the tenant population isn't requesting it because they don't have these types of vehicles. If they don't have these types of vehicles because there's no place to charge at their rental properties. This is a very new and emerging sort of field and infrastructure that is going in around the state and also around the country. So I think I would, preface my comments with that this is not something that's on the screen for housing provider communities, not something that they have been dealing with or are looking at sort of the competing interests of things that housing providers deal with. This is would be very low on the list of things on day to day.
Can I ask a question? Do you hear from landlords about tenants wanting to do some energy efficiency programs, some environmental subsidized programs through the EIC? And I mean, because I think this is just the logical next step in a lot of those, but tenants do report to us that they have a hard time, getting some other benefit to their electricity or utility bill because programs are designed for homeowners.
Right. And I think that's a different issue than if, landlords not being open to doing these types of works and programs. I mean, I think we just need to look at the VHIP program that was put into place during COVID. So that's the Vermont Housing Improvement Program. And one of the components and one of the uses for that money related to energy efficiency. It was primarily focused on rehabbing of rental units, but it did have an energy efficiency component, and that program has oversold every time new money's been put into the program. So I think the demand is there, and I think the desire to have programs or use programs is there. I think, as we all know, it's a monetary and it's a funding issue. So I think if there were more programs available to the rental community, landlords, tenants, I think they would get utilized. I think the VHIP shows us that there's desire to use those programs. And you're correct, most of the energy efficiency grants and other economic assistance vehicles are specifically for homeowners.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I was reading through this bill, I think one of the largest impediments that I see is, from what I understand, the cost is to have these types of chargers installed. This is not an inexpensive project.
we hope to have the players in. We have Burlington Electric sitting with us, but we know that there are middle organizations that have funding, and that unless there's some nexus where, they can say, okay, there's some, there's like, we want to make sure that for them, this makes it more useful to offer subsidies for installing these for rental properties. So, right, I think that's why it's very clear that the cost is on the tenant at this time.
So, I think with new construction, landlords will definitely, and housing developers are definitely putting in. What this really is about is retrofitting older rental units, because I think new rental units and new housing construction that landlords are building.
Right, there's
include-
different considerations for the new developments that are happening, and I think we've seen retrofitting existing properties sometimes can be incredibly challenging. There's a lot of different factors that everybody has to look into, from permitting to where's it going to go to how do we monitor this. One of the things I was thinking of, just from a management standpoint, so say a tenant goes through this process, gets that EV charger, probably what's going to happen is a landlord would have to assign that parking space to that particular tenant, right? Because otherwise you're going to show up, somebody's going to be parked in your charging space. Like, how does this work? I could also see a situation where somebody with an EV vehicle who does not have that charger parks there and uses the tenant's charger to charge their vehicle. Like, I think there's some practical things that would need to get sort of worked through and could create some conflict and problems. Not to say that couldn't be addressed, but I think just logistically there's some things to think through. Also, does this get taken out when the tenant leaves? Like, there's some practical things that everybody would need to work through.
I think that's entirely fair. Parking is something I think a lot of landlords have to manage in a very emotionally charged way anyway. Not to say that I minimize your concerns. Senator Harris.
Yes, no, parking is huge, on both sides, all sides.
Right.
I just want to say that this field is changing tremendously. Hopefully there will be able to be a charger that can be moved and like put in a car. So you take your charger, and I think they already exist. Take your charger in your car. But that's just one example. But the point I want to make is, when you're making a new development and when you're renovating, especially a parking lot or any sort of driveway, just put conduit in. Empty conduit can make a huge difference later on. Because one thing that we know for sure is that you need electricity to the location. And conduit is cheap to put in. So it'd be really helpful if landlords and all developers put in more conduit than they think they're going to need. Because not only will it be necessary for electricity, but you also might want it for the paying. Because there's all different kinds of ways to pay, and the ways to pay are going to change. So you might want a separate conduit for that. So I just want to say, put in conduit.
Right. And I would agree for also things like fiber, for internet access. Folks, even if fiber internet's not in your location, it's probably coming. And if you run fiber now, then your building's prepared for sort of the future. I think there's it's training, retraining, or training developers as they're doing their projects to think ahead of what they might need in the future. But it also, it can drive costs, and people are very concerned about how expensive it is to develop and redevelop properties right now.
Before we go deep into discussion, Angela, because I'm just trying to manage all of our time, I just want to make sure you've been able to say your kind of overall position on the bill, and if you want to work on language changes with the committee, and that would create opportunities for support. Like, just want to get a base sense of where you and your membership are on this bill overall.
Sure. I think overall, from an idea standpoint, I think it's it makes sense. It is, you know, it puts the burden on the tenant to request, and really the landlord's providing the approval and saying, yes, let's figure out if this is going to work and there's a space there. You know, I had some questions about specific language in the bill, you know, some related to obligations turning into rent payments, and that gets very tricky with the landlord-tenant relationship. And so maybe that's not the right language or approach, but I'm always happy to work with committee members or work with legislative counsel for redrafting or, you know, providing input on specific language.
So do we have a written version of the concerns you're raising?
From me, no.
Okay, is that something you're, so we could do it in future subsequent meetings, et cetera, but
Yeah.
it would be helpful if you were comfortable putting suggested language changes or the concerns you have in a document that
Okay.
can be posted. But you know, I just want to give you a couple of minutes now if you want to run through those quickly, and that will maybe engender questions from the committee. So you've now sort of stated are you ready for another question?
Sure. No, absolutely. Fire away.
I just appreciate you reminding us that in fact, there is modest incentive already built into our work in the VHIP program for
Mhm.
land.
Okay.
It's because it is for vacant, blighted and non-compliant and weatherization. And this absolutely would fit into energy efficiency and weatherization.
Okay.
stuff.
So let's let Angela go back through. If you
Yeah.
want to share.
You have some.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, walking through sort of the specific, and I'm focusing on section 1 only because that's the piece that relates to rental properties. So I was looking at page 4, starting line 6, which is it looks like section 4. And so it specifically says obligation of the tenant to pay as a part of the rent for the costs associated with electrical usage. Sitting here right now, if that was written into statute, I don't actually know if that would trump the way landlord tenant statute views rent payments. So rent is very specific to be just rent. And anything
Right,
else is not
Yeah.
rent. And so this appears to be changing that relationship by saying these associated electrical costs would be considered rent.
So that's in that section 4 on page 4, right? Is that?
Yes.
Everyone's section. Okay, yeah. Line 6. Right. Right. To say something is an obligation as part of rent, Damien, do you have is that a big deal?
So this language, that as part of rent phrasing came from the other states. I actually see no problem with striking as part of rent. So
Yeah.
obligation of the tenant. to pay for
Right.
the
They can
costs
negotiate
associated.
how that happens.
And they
It can be
can figure
directly
out.
to
Even
the.
if you pay a
Right.
direct electric bill.
Yeah.
because Usually
So
there's
Maybe
some independent meter.
Right.
So if that's on your meter, you're paying
Yeah,
relative electric.
Right. Yes. Thank you for flagging that. I think
that's good.
I agree. I think I'm not
Totally
hearing
agree.
disagreement
No, that's
that just is, you know, a little bit loaded of a.
does deleting those 4 words address your concern, Angela?
What she's suggesting is the deleting obligation.
No.
No,
Hey.
just to
Just
pay
for
for the costs, not
Yeah.
to pay as part of rent.
Right.
Yeah, I think so, because it still would, the tenant would still maintain the obligation. It's just, it would be a separate obligation from rent. And I think Vermont's just very weird in how it, maybe not weird, but it's just,
Yeah.
it's different from other states in how it views those other charges. So I think that would clear that up, and keep the obligation on the tenant, and then it would get sorted out through agreements, or I think sorry, you guys are very, very small on my screen and a little tiny. So I don't know who mentioned that if a separate meter had to be put in, the tenant may have actually be the account holder on that meter, and then they would be responsible for those payments to the electric company. Not even landlord wouldn't be involved in that at all.
I think many, if not most landlords do that. You'll see a big old house and on the back, there's 4 electric meters.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the property, but yes, many of them have been broken out by unit with individual electrical meters. I did have a question about H on the same page, starting at line 10, regarding whether folks could even get liability insurance coverage that would cover this type of situation. I think they could definitely get liability coverage that would cause or cover personal injury kinds of claims for the devices, but I don't believe that they could get a policy that would cover the removal, installation removal if there was damage. Usually insurance policies don't work like that per se. Maybe there's a special policy that I don't know about that's related to this type of installation.
No, you're right. I mean, just renters insurance, like, we'd have to ask if this is something that could be covered, really, like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Does it require a special writer? Is it, I think, again, this is so new and emerging. Insurance companies may not have caught up yet to it. But, I'm always trying to be mindful of not placing obligations on folks that they can't then comply with because the product doesn't exist.
Like, put it in our minds that we could have a rental policy, you think, for it to come in the week after. Damien, do you have thoughts on this?
No, I actually, I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
You may want to hear from the Association of Property and Casualty Insurers.
Okay.
They would
Yeah.
likely be able to get an answer.
Okay.
But the removal, because the removal.
Yeah.
Um,
I also want to say, everyone, I'm fully prepared to determine that this is not going to make crossover if we can't answer these questions. I think this interested people. We wanted to take more testimony, but we could open up some issues that we can't close right now. So
Because
they're coming.
I think what we're trying to say is if the tenant has to pay for everything,
Mm-hmm.
the tenant has to have liability insurance if he breaks the water
Mhm.
line while he's playing with the electrics. He's got some liability, and I'm assuming he'd have a professional electrician doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is done, then subsection I would say you don't need to obtain insurance if you get
A licensed electrician.
you get it installed by a licensed electrician and any separate meter for it is installed by the utility.
Mm-hmm.
And then the actual charging equipment has
Okay.
been certified by National Testing Lab.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
see
there's a
like a
way
tenant
out.
run wires through a
Right.
house that,
Yeah, an
Right.
alternative to
Bad
all this too is to simply say, the tenants are required to, have it installed by a licensed electrician for the utility and to, install something that's been approved. And then, just go from there or allow landlords to require that, whatever makes
Mhm,
sense, but
yeah.
you can bypass that instead of saying like, here's your incentive to like get someone licensed to do it,
Yeah.
simply say a landlord is only obligated to comply with this if,
the whole, like,
if
Mhm.
it's installed by a
because they have
professional.
liability insurance if they do damage.
Mhm.
Yes, hopefully.
So, and Angela, do you have thoughts about that alternative language and how that might satisfy your members?
I mean, I think there's a way through that, but just those two, there's two different things in that section, right? The personal liability for potential personal injury related to the installation or operation, and then there is a component that's for the time of installation, which sort of gets waived if you're complying with section I, right? So I think there's two different insurance components in that, and it might make sense to break them apart. So it's clear that they're separate and it's insurance for two different things that are happening here.
Right.
You might want to make sure the insurance is available.
Right, and the
That too.
insurance might be more available because you broke your leg tripping on the wiring versus, having an electric meter that, somebody installed that, had this so
Yeah,
separate.
wiring shouldn't be running around to trip.
I'm sorry, I don't.
I'm wondering
The charging cord,
the charging cord.
yeah.
Well,
But there,
do I
yeah,
have to have liability? When I have homeowners, does that cover somebody tripping on my electric?
gosh, I'm not the person to ask.
So we're gonna get the insurance company, we're gonna ask all these questions, thank you for flagging.
Yep.
Angela, other concerns that you wanna raise?
Yes, I have one more, I think, and if I think of any later, I will certainly send something to the committee in writing.
Okay,
But stepping back one page to page 3 of the bill, looking at section 3, so it looks like it's G3, starting at line 20. And I think it may just be a language or a drafting concern that I have, but everything else in this bill is sort of tenant focused, landlords providing permission to do the work and the installation. And then section 3 is talking about the obligation of the tenant to pay the lessor for the lessor's installation of these. So I wasn't sure if this was a carve out for if the landlord's taking charge of the installation, that then the tenant's responsible to pay the landlord for that, or if it was meant to be something else, because it's sort of a departure from the rest of the language in the bill, which seems to be very tenant focused on tenant doing the work, tenant making the arrangements, landlord providing approval.
so the question is the intent here that if the lessor says, you know what, I'd like to manage this because I want it to be done my way, and here's the cost of it, that be voluntary but not required of the landlord. Is that kind of the question you're raising?
I think so, or to make clear that that's what that section is intending. So if the landlord agrees to take on the project, then the tenant is responsible for paying the landlord the cost of that project, not that somehow the landlord is now responsible to do the project if the tenant is requesting it. And I think that that's my concern, is making sure there's not language that puts the burden on the landlord to see the project to completion just because the tenant requested it.
Right, so
I'm concerned that we are setting up, the tenant will pay the landlord. Well, once the stuff's in, the tenant smashes up his electric vehicle and he moves. And now the landlord is stuck with the bill and, he's got an EV station. But to have the landlord have to put, I think we're setting up for landlord to get stuck with the bill.
So, I mean, Angela, you can speak to that if you have that overarching concern. They don't, they don't have to proceed with the installation without a strong agreement. And they have things like collections available to them for enforcing or small claims.
If I could also make the note on the top of page 4, it says the obligation is to require them to pay prior to any modification being made.
Right, good.
So they can require upfront payment.
Right.
I would also note, Angela, I also noticed that the term lessor was used here, and I think that's because my former colleague who drafted this bill just wasn't aware that we use the term landlord in Vermont and carry the language over from Colorado or California. So that's all going to be changed to be consistent with the rest of landlord tenant law.
Okay.
Just so there aren't questions about whether we mean something different.
Okay.
But yeah, that can be clarified, that it's the landlord can either permit the tenant to engage the contractors and pay them directly for the work, or the landlord can do that themselves and require upfront payment. So does that reflect or address the concern?
It
If it were-
does. I think I want to make sure that one, it's at the landlord's option and that they're not then forced to take this project on simply because the tenant requested the installation of this. So yes.
Okay. Super helpful. We absolutely want to get into the weeds on this bill and see if we can come out the other side by the week following crossover with things that we're comfortable with. But you're absolutely, the insurance piece, I think, is a really big question mark. Senator Brock.
As you look at the costs associated with this bill, particularly if it's not just simply the device being attached in the garage, but also some electrical work to, let's say, increase the size of the entrance and the like, these could become quite costly. In your experience, is this something that tenants are likely to pay for?
No, I don't believe so. Not without some sort of extra like grant funding or programs to help offset the costs. I don't think it's realistic that tenants would be spending the money in a location where they're not potentially living permanently to do an improvement or project of this magnitude.
So I see the possibility that we want to talk about language kind of similar to ADA, where we say, like, if this becomes a hardship, you know, this, like, we don't have to, this is not an obligation that the landlord has to meet if it's such percentage of above and beyond a certain project. We can contemplate that. I also want to hear from, you know, people who are trying to offer these subsidies to see essentially if language like this helps make those dollars available, because I would say that's our intent, is to make resources that are state, especially state funded, you know, and grant funded available to tenants. And if not, yes, I can see how this bill just doesn't add a significant amount of value, you know, period. So if possible, like Angela, I think that concern is heard, that this might create a huge new financial obligation for everyone that seems unrealistic. We might be able to take care of that while also creating a better nexus for tenants to be eligible for these funds.
And it may be as simple as specifically referencing installation of EV chargers in the VHIP statute. So that's a very clear allowable use of funds for that bill, because that would incentivize landlords.
Like energy efficiency or whatever. Yeah, it would be VHIP and other programs, but you're right. Like, I think this bill is to ensure that if we have state funds available, that there's some language that allows a renter to be able to take advantage of it, but they probably need some kind of agreement like this to put less responsibility on the landlord to participate and still allow it to happen.
And in the case of VHIP, there's money for the landlord to do this and provide it as an additional
Right, understood.
service for
Yeah.
their tenants.
Right, okay, so, but understood, Randy, like, we're not gonna, if it's a huge cost, it's not like this has to happen.
Well, the other question is also one of time. In this really compressed market, limited market that we have, based on what you know of your members, is it likely something that there would be any enthusiasm about doing if this caused a delay in the occupancy of properties? Would, for example, this having to be paid upfront by the tenant, would the tenant in effect have to pay this stuff before moving in for the work to be done? And is there an extensive period of time that would be required in order to get the construction, the contractors, whatever necessary to have this done? In other words, is this practical?
And I think the answer to that, based on what I've heard just about regular repair work that needs to happen, is no, we don't have the workers or the skilled workers, or they don't have the capacity to take on extra projects. It's very difficult right now for housing providers, even for homeowners, to find electricians, plumbers, folks to do small projects. Like, they can't even get basic repairs done in a timely fashion. So I think a project of this magnitude is not going to be a top priority unless there's this new emerging market of contractors or people that are focusing just on these types of installations. And I think that could realistically hold up ability to access rental housing, or that somebody would have to move in and then wouldn't get their EV charger until they're able to pay for the costs, and then there could be months long delay of getting it installed. So yes, I think there are some also practical challenges here.
So I will say, I think we can include language that says it's not contingent on the lease agreement and that, you can't sort of have this fit up time. We can word that, I think most people in the status quo right now are taking their EVs, renting somewhere if they're a renter who can afford an EV, and figuring out where to charge their vehicle. So, that's also a BED question. And I think we've heard and understood for landlords the practicality issues. I would like to start to move us along so we can at least finish this today.
Sure. And I'm happy to stay on if there's other questions that come up with other folks' testimony. And I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in.
Senator Harris.
Okay, first of all, this is a voluntary program, so I think that's important to say. There will be additional funding, not necessarily via, but there already is, there was a pilot. And a place where it would make sense now, I believe, are for single family homes that are rented. There are lots of those, and it's not a big deal. It's still expensive, but it's not that big of a deal to put a charger right outside. So I just want that to be in our
I think with the money involved.
Right.
You're writing a big bill for which less than a dozen people might take, to afford a $51,000 car.
Right.
Excludes a good portion of the population.
I will say, I think there's value because this is the direction the market is headed. This is the direction our laws are headed. I will
They're getting
never,
cheaper and cheaper.
I will never miss an opportunity to say, we will not meet our climate goals unless we build housing and have a workforce.
Exactly.
So agreed, Burlington can barely get the landlords they've asked to reduce their electricity bills with efficiency measures. They're not enforcing that right now, is my understanding, because it takes a year or more to even find a contractor to do that work. So,
One of the other
we're in a bad place with meeting our climate goals.
Also
we are.
consider is the mention of successor tenants. And whether or not doing this for one tenant, theoretically, the tenant has paid for it all so long as they don't default. Would this have the effect of raising the rental value of that for the future? In other words, would this have the effect of increasing rents subsequently?
It probably is of great value to somebody because if they have an electric vehicle, it's like having laundry in the basement or something. That's a huge amenity.
Except if he takes books it and takes it with him.
Well, but the infrastructure remains. They're not pulling out.
Still in a position in which we have extremely low vacancy rates. And that is the only thing on the market. And do they pay for something at that point? Because that's the only thing available and they have to. Does that have the effect of increasing rents?
To have to offer an EV charging.
Well, no, that they aren't able to use. So let's say the tenant moves out.
Correct.
The structure stays.
Yeah, and the
And a
successor
person
tenant
without an
does not
EV
have,
moves in.
the only thing is available are properties that have this infrastructure. It's just a question. And it requires a little bit of thought, not economic analysis.
Right.
Is that what behavior would require?
And is there a cost benefit analysis associated with just having more omnipresent EV charging infrastructure? Because that can be a huge barrier to purchasing an electric vehicle too. If your renter is never going to be able to access a charging station. So thank you, Angela. It would be great if you stayed on, I think. I didn't know if folks were coming in person, so I'd love to get them in the witness chair. You've obviously heard all of this conversation. So, if you want to start by responding to any of that, and you're both welcome to come up at the same time if that's.
Okay.
And I just want to say to the committee, we are working on moving some of our testimony to tomorrow, so I don't foresee us taking a basic needs budget vote today, but doing it tomorrow. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Amber Widmer. I'm the regulatory specialist for Burlington Electric Department.
I'm Freddie Hall, resource planner.
I brought paper copies of the presentation basically.
Thank you.
We're here to express our support for the bill, that's the 71. And basically just serve as a resource, talk about some of the programs we have in place.
Did you do an extra copy for our committee assistant?
No, I did it.
Okay,
It's online.
I'll give, yeah, right.
I'm also sharing screen.
Oh, great. And you'll send this to us electronically.
It should be, yeah.
Yeah, they have.
Great, good, that's such.
Since we've never been in this committee, at least that I know of, just provide some background about BV itself.
Because we're not usually our area of specialties.
Right, yeah, I figured. So
Why our conversation?
gives you some context. We're the largest municipal utility in the state. We have about 21,000 customers and a pretty high turnover rate because UVM is in our territory.
Yeah.
Up to about 6,000 customers turnover a year. And about 60% of our customers are renters. That's very applicable.
So, man, just as, why do you only have 21,000 customers? I mean, does Burlington have, does GMP also service, obviously, Burlington? Is that your?
The city of Burlington matches the EV's territory. We're a municipal utility, so there's the same boundary.
Burlington.
Yeah, but it's a town of 40,000 people.
Customer is a household.
Oh, right, okay, so that's the total number of houses, so you basically serve all.
But you also serve more towns than Burlington.
No,
Really?
they only do, I knew they only did Burlington.
And you haven't gotten your excess heat to UVM yet, right?
Not yet. Working on
She's working on it.
So is it like,
And we've been 100% renewable utility since 2014.
100% renewable.
Yeah.
all wood chips? The kind comes in.
Neil serves more than Burlington.
Yes.
Okay, I was like, I know we've had this conversation
But not,
about fee bills and wood, the cost of wood burning.
And
And McNeil serves other municipalities.
correct, there's McNeil is jointly owned by GMP, that's the EV,
Okay.
and B takes about a third of our.
50%, but third of our portfolio. So.
On the next slide, we give an overview of a couple of our programs that allow charging to be available for multifamily residents.
in very tiny type.
Yes, sorry.
I'm
Well, we
sure-
have it.
Even there, it's under.
Next time I'll do one slide per page. It's a program called EV Match, which we did a pilot program. They were a participant in an incubator program we have with Delta Klein, where we started a pilot. We worked with this company called EV Match to do a pilot program where we helped them set up, find the landlords who would be interested in installing chargers for their tenants. And if they were to make it publicly accessible, people can find the charger on an app. So it functions like an Airbnb for EV chargers. And I believe we have about 30 of those.
Family houses.
Yes.
But they exist in a private lot.
Correct.
Okay, it's not like street parking.
Which brings us to the one on the right, which is through the state multifamily grant program. We're working on installing 5 of these chargers. You can see in the picture, they're on a pole. So that allows it to be in a publicly accessible area for anybody to pull up and charge.
So potentially 5 cars could charge at the same pole at the same time.
No, 5.
Oh,
They're in
they're 5 different poles. I was like, very cool. We need more of that.
That would be wonderful.
That would be very,
Okay.
And the locations are noted on that map in the dotted
yeah, we see.
areas.
That's interesting that you do it full instead of in the ground.
It helps for like snow removal, makes it
Oh,
easier to install as well.
Okay.
but it's just one, you can't have one on either side? Have two?
You could have the tool, but for now we're testing it. We
Hmm.
haven't seen this product in Burlington before, so we want to make sure it works before selling a lot more.
So I'm sure you're gonna get to this, but you have to go through the landlord right now to do this kind of multifamily project. The landlord has to agree and take financial responsibility?
So yeah, that's currently how the program on the left that Amber mentioned has progressed from a pilot to an actual program.
Mhm.
And so, we have a few different options for the property owner to install the charger. But it's very much focused on going through the route of the property owner.
Mhm.
So they have to be okay with
Right.
installing it.
So
They have to be okay with it, or they have to, like, I guess the big question here is, would this bill help you work directly with a tenant?
or directly with the landlord to incentivize their installing these.
I could see both.
Okay.
So I think, you have two options. So typically, like someone mentioned that you've seen an old building, 4 different electric meters. Each meter is dedicated to a tenant who lives in that property. There's typically also a master meter. And so the program that we're working on now with multifamily property owners is to install the charger on that master meter
Mhm.
and then transact basically through EV Match, which, as Amber mentioned, is a platform that handles those transactions.
Mhm. Can you share how much, maybe it's somewhere else, but $1,200, how does that compare to the cost that they're facing?
In terms of the install of the charger,
I don't know, like they
Yeah.
start with a blacktop parking lot and they say, oh, we'd love to be part of this program.
sure.
What percentage
Okay.
usually does the $1,200 represent?
Sure, so we can, go into the numbers a bit more.
Yeah.
We typically say that the charger is about $700, give or take.
And GMP gives them to you.
Well, we're,
They're, yeah, if they were giving you $1,200, they're giving
So
it
these
to
are
you
the
too.
costs.
these are the incentives that we provide to,
Well, the $700 is a cost.
it is cost.
Okay,
Okay.
the actual charger costs $700.
It's actually,
And that's a level 2.
mhm. And so there's that
Okay.
component of it. The install can range pretty widely. So, if you deal with a new build, it's a lot easier to get conduit in than
Mhm.
something that's not torn up.
Yeah.
You might have to decrease the electric panel. There are a lot of variables that
Mhm.
you're playing with. So typically, I think we fluctuate between 500 and to 1,500 just to be conservative
Mhm.
on that distribution.
Mhm.
And so I think there's actually a slide and
But
you want me just to skip ahead?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
So this is a slide already put together that gives a range of cost estimates. With the top showing the charger being at 750, with and without the incentive. So in addition to the EV Match program we were just talking about, any customer can get a rebate for a level 2 charger for $900, and that's designed to cover, part of the cost, part of the installation.
Mhm.
So with that incentive, this is how the years of payback come. I'll also get to this, we have an EV rate. If you do install a charger, level 2 charger that's compatible with the EV rate program, we are able to give you back half of the cost of everything that you spend on charging.
Great.
I can go into that.
Mhm. And you generally see this, to go to Senator Brock's earlier question, you generally see this being something, the budget for all kinds of types of housing. A parking lot in the back in a multifamily property, or say someone's renting part of a duplex or a single family home. They can charge somewhere in and around the garage or outside of the garage
So
with this kind of installation.
I think, yes, either way, through either program, the EV Match currently is the one that Freddie was talking about that could be put onto the house meter. If this bill were put into effect and more individual renters wanted to install their own charger, they could potentially be on the EV rate and, have their own individual charger. So there's a couple different scenarios.
Or their own charger, meaning like a pole, but has a charger on it. Or
More
like
just
a
an
freestanding-
actual freestanding charger.
a freestanding charger, okay.
Installed behind
Yeah.
their meter.
Okay.
The one that was on a pole, those are going to be public chargers.
Got it.
So
Okay,
there's a couple different things going on.
okay, so freestanding could be not on a pole.
Could be on, could be on a wall.
I'm just trying to mentally picture all this. Okay,
Or pedestal, or, yeah.
okay, so that
Could
kind
be
of,
on the wall.
yeah. I mean, because so much of the bill deals with liability and where it goes, so I'm just trying to make sure. For almost any rental housing scenario you can think of in Burlington, this represents the general cost range. Have you run into a situation where you're like, you know what? It would be like $5,000 instead.
It could happen.
Okay, what would be
yeah.
some of the factors that might increase the cost?
I think 5,000 is an extreme example.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So, like I said, the panel upgrade, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that could be one. If
Mhm.
If you found
Prior-
a job in tube wiring,
Mhm.
$1,000.
I was gonna mention that too.
Small.
Mm-hmm. Are you doing something similar to what GMP is with Tesla Powerwalls?
We don't have a program for.
Okay.
But GMP does have a charger program, and the charger.
GMP or BEV?
No, GMP.
We both-
Okay, oh, okay.
Yeah,
So, okay,
because, and my,
yeah.
like the charger that I got was about, was
Mhm.
$350, I think, $350.
Okay, and that was a
So
panel
that
upgrade
changed.
type of thing?
No, that's not the panel, that's just
Oh.
the charger.
Yeah, yeah.
And
The
so,
whole.
no, just the charger itself that needs to be installed.
But,
And
but you
That
need a panel
connects to the
upgrade.
car.
Do you need a panel upgrade to do
I
that?
did, but
Yeah.
it has other benefits, so when you
Mhm.
think about it, like our garage now has electricity and it didn't before.
Right,
So that's a good
Yeah.
thing, and
Yeah.
more than, it
Yeah.
benefits more than just the charger.
I'm trying to come up with scenarios in
Oh,
which
yeah.
this adds significant cost and the landlord would say, you know what? Like, we're not a good candidate for this at this time, and we would let them out of the bill. I wanna see if those kinds of scenarios exist where they have a really old home, since we have a lot of those.
Yeah.
And the cost would be prohibitive. Do you have any of those?
Well, I mean, there are cases certainly that
Yeah.
there are high costs that renter decides it doesn't make sense, or the landlord decides it can make sense.
Yeah.
But I think the way that it's written currently is that putting emphasis on renter to pay
Yeah.
for it, there's gonna be a situation where if the capital cost is exorbitant, then it doesn't make sense to move forward with it.
Right.
But the rental would be improving the property, in my opinion.
Oh, I get it. I'm
So-
just really trying to answer other questions.
Yeah.
Damien.
It's also worth noting that just as part of the current bill, the bill doesn't apply to rentals where there are fewer than 5 parking spaces.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, which probably takes care of a lot of our oldest.
So a lot of your single family
Yeah,
rentals or duplex rentals in Burlington and other places around the state are unlikely to meet that threshold.
Well, that's actually a good question where if it doesn't apply, could we still have a kind of a agreement, like could this language still help a single family renter? You know what I mean? Like,
So this gets back to what Angela was talking about
Yeah.
earlier with providing incentives to
Mhm.
landlords or for their tenants there to be able to install it in those homes.
yeah,
Really, this is putting a requirement on owners of larger properties
right.
to install this or to allow the install
Mhm.
at the tenant's expense
Mhm.
if requested. And so they would be the ones drawing down the incentives for
And it's by
this.
parking space, not by unit, right?
So, so it can be associated with the unit. So say I've got let's say like a 10-unit building, it's an existing building, so it's not subject to the commercial building energy standards, which would have required some hardwiring with the new with any new parking build. Then the tenant in unit 1 requests an EV charger because they've just bought a brand new EV. Assuming they're willing to pay for it and comply with the other requirements, this bill would obligate the landlord to allow that moving forward. But so that's basically what this bill does. But one of the big questions is so imagine that you have your building is set up in such a way that you would have the drop from the electrical service is on the far side of the building from the parking. Now you have to run power through the building and you may have to trench out to wherever the landlord decides that can go. That's where you get into the potential expenses
Mhm.
versus if you can, run right from the meter, a few feet away to a unit that you install on the side of the building that's right next to the parking space where the tenant parks. And you can run into vastly different considerations
Mhm.
in terms of costs. So
Okay. Senator Cummings.
Have we heard that there is a problem where the tenant says, I'll pay for it? I mean, Senator Vohovsky said she did have, parking for electric vehicle. But I didn't hear her say she volunteered to pay for the installation
Mhm.
because.
Well, what she
That's-
did say was that she's not eligible on her own
Right,
for any.
for any of these
funds.
things, we could do that, but. I think just given the cost of paying for the installation,
Mhm.
maybe the easiest one, given the rents. Where half our
Mhm.
people are paying 50% of their income and more for rent. I don't think this is gonna be. A program that's hugely taken up.
I don't know
No,
about
I don't
hugely, we
either.
don't do things only because they're hugely taken up, as electric vehicles enter the used market, as we have other committees that would like to pass bills that further subsidize EV charging and EV infrastructure. What our committee has to consider is we are leaving renters behind, so they cannot even consider that option in the next 10 years unless we start to see more EV infrastructure.
And we've provided some incentive
Right.
modest for
Right.
landlords. We now need to help renters
Right.
do the right thing.
I mean, how many cars right now on the road are EVs as a percentage?
Burlington is
Well,
3-4%.
3-4%. So we're already talking about,
13% statewide though. I think we're up
Is
to.
we have a lot of renters in Burlington. So either way,
Slide.
we're talking about a small percentage of people and we're paying a lot for EV infrastructure.
I mean,
We're trying to say,
ownership.
as that percentage grows,
I,
we need to let renters be a part of it. So
I
that's
have-
our consideration as a committee.
I've always said that, just say statewide, we're gonna encourage EVs. Where we should be encouraging is our built-up areas where you don't have to drive long distances to work, so you don't worry about not being able to charge to get home.
Well,
When
and
there's a high concentration, which means you've got a lot of exhaust fumes. I think we'd be a lot more successful, and if this helps. But I think those are the areas
Yeah.
that we really are concentrated areas.
those are the areas full of renters.
Yeah.
Who might not have a good relationship with they're just not around, they're dealing with hundreds of properties. Like you're saying, you could see tenants feeling empowered by this to have a different conversation with their landlord. And Burlington would probably be ground zero for where this could have benefit. You might have a student whose parents paid for an electric car, but they're not sitting there, helping them find an EV charging place. And they might say, I'd pay for, you to have a charging station at your
If
house.
he's a student, then I'm pretty sure his parents are gonna be paying.
That's what I'm saying, but the
Right.
parents could say, we'll also pay for your EV charging station, we're not,
Or those.
yeah.
Yeah, let's just expand the conversation when we do this next to include single family, because I just think that is.
Yeah, I agree.
Where it really
Yeah,
makes
so-
sense.
Or a 4-unit building with 4 parking spots.
Right, or a 1-unit
Mhm.
building.
And there are lots of houses that are rented.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
right.
I agree.
Right, so I think in Senator Mihovsky's defense, she was trying to find a sweet spot. But we're saying make this a pretty voluntary program that creates incentives, but make it available for 1 to 4 parking spots as well.
Or just all units, all rental units.
Well, they have to have a parking spot. So we,
There's.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
There's
Just
those that don't,
Yeah.
that don't.
well, I'm saying the requirement has to be that there's a rental parking spot available. Which, if that's not the case, they're not, we still might want to say that they're not eligible for the bill. Yes, go on.
And so yes, maybe you can take over just a second just to make sure that we're explaining this correctly. So I think the EV match program, is targeted on the property owner. We do have single family, kind of more focused example with EV charging incentives that are tied to purchasing EV as well. And those are, typically focused on folks who, either have already gotten there, they live in a family property, their landlords, go ahead to do it, or they live in a single family house. And that's, tied into getting the charger along with the car. And then in doing that, they can join our electric vehicle rate. And, I see this as, kind of lifting any barriers for the renter to being able to access those programs.
Do e-bikes need a similar thing if they're gonna charge quickly? Like, or do e-bikes
Typically, it's
plug
just
in?
a plug-in 120 volt.
Okay, okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
If you want to take over.
So this is a slide just showing the range of, as Freddie was saying, complementary incentives for the purchase, for the charger, and then with the rate. This is how many customers have taken advantage of those purchase incentives. So we're moving in the right direction, but
Yeah.
a long way to go.
Yeah, so 722.
And they're about 23,000 cars, so that's like 3%, 4% in that range.
So we're preparing for the future.
So I'll wait.
And then this next slide,
With this bill.
Well, it's happening.
Mhm.
The rate of change is right.
I bought an EV on Monday
Congratulations.
to replace my totaled car from the
Oh,
deer.
right.
Congratulations.
So the deer helped you.
So we're in the
How
process
easy
of
is right in
exactly.
here?
help me do the right thing.
Yeah.
Now, most of the probably go under, but how did that?
My deer,
Yeah.
the deer ran
Like,
right into
most of
the side of my
under?
car.
Ran.
Total.
I mean, there are EV trucks.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I know.
it's just like
The
any.
governor has a big black one.
Right.
Right. Anyway, so I'm right in the middle of making these choices, which is exciting.
It's exciting.
Okay.
and this last slide just shows, even if you do get the car and the charger, some people still aren't signing up for the rate. And, anything that would remove obstacles to customers getting the charger would maybe help more people to get on the rate, which helps us, because then we're able to manage when people are charging, so everyone's not charging all at one time, which saves everybody costs.
Right. Let's say we pass this bill. Do you foresee like a new flyer coming out, a new announcement saying, hey renters, like, talk to your landlord, talk to us. We wanna, like, if you're thinking about buying an EV, there's funding available for you to work with your landlord to.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
I mean, you could market
Put it
more
on
to
the
tenants than to landlords only.
We have a website with all the incentives and,
Yeah.
a guide for how to get onto the rate.
And I'd also mention that, there are a list of steps that you have to go through. And so, we had an intern that worked on a roadmap to basically, what boxes do you need to check as someone who lives in that property? That was very much focused on the family.
Yeah.
And so like bringing that up and saying, hey, if you're interested, these are the steps, contact an electrician, here are the incentives,
Awesome.
work with your landlord. But you're also empowered to do that.
It's right.
Right. Any other questions, anything you all wanted to?
Well,
Yeah.
What additionally could we do to incent landlords to engage with you in this opportunity?
I mean, so far we've mostly been relying on financial incentives.
How do you feel about the workforce issue? I mean, I didn't want to call you all out, but I know that it's extremely hard to get, even in Burlington, where there are incentives and laws and it's you're getting bigger projects. It's hard for people to find the personnel to do this work.
Well, I will tell you, because I'll be trying to find an electrician to do the art,
Right.
because you have to create the infrastructure at home to make this possible.
Yeah.
Even though we have some fast chargers in Woodstock, but I'll let you know how long it takes to get an electrician.
Yeah, but
They're getting better at it too.
What do your workforce needs look like to make these projects happen?
Yeah, I would say, my experience with seeing chargers installed, it does, add a little bit to the timeline, but the projects still get done. You still find electricians and different contractors to do the work. obviously wish there were more,
Mhm.
wish the costs were lower, but we also have incentives to help with those costs and yeah, and federal funding as well. So.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Can I just ask a
Yeah,
general
of
EV
course.
charging question? So does your company have any sort of regulatory authority or just, do folks have to connect with you for the public chargers? Like, can I ask you just a general public charger question? Because at some point we need credit card, ability. And there are a few that take credit cards without having to have an account.
Sure.
You know, it just needs to be as easy as gas, right?
Mhm.
Cash would be great, but we don't have that.
Yeah.
But, do you see progress towards that? Or are there any, or,
Yeah, so I'd say like they do take credit cards, but as you said, through the app.
yeah,
So there's a layer of creating an account. The NEVI requirements have mandated that payment systems are implemented in order to get federal funding.
oh,
And
good,
so I think that that's pushing in the right direction.
good,
Yeah, I think kind of my take on it is that it's all credit card fees are based on a transaction cost. And so that's kind of why some of these companies turn to apps that do like a single, $20, $30 account
Right.
balance so that they don't have to transact multiple times. And the great thing is that EV charging is relatively cheap because it's efficient to charge with electricity. But that also comes in turn of more transaction fees as you have more of those small transactions.
and they're not as reliable, obviously, as gas stations yet. I mean, a lot of them, like, they're out of commission. And they're different from each other, and it can just, and Tesla doesn't yet allow others to access theirs, but hopefully they will soon.
Well, yeah, they have a pilot with 10 and 12 that I've used, which like in 2025, or I guess actually 2024, they're opening up to different car companies.
Oh.
Yeah, they're.
In
But-
Burlington? Or in,
we don't have the Tesla
country.
supercharger in Rome, but I think there's one in South. But yeah,
but you said 10, is that 10 in the state?
10 in the country.
Oh, okay, we probably won't have one.
So.
But there are a lot of
You're
agreements that are
charging
being
way
signed.
Right.
To open up that NACS access to Ford, GM. I don't know if you remember any others that are. Yeah, but that's gonna be really,
That'll make a huge
Big,
difference, yeah.
but I'd also just mention that the NEVI requirements also have a minimum uptime for funding. And so that's pushing these fast chargers to maintain reliability standards.
The liability,
Reliability
oh,
standards,
good,
yeah.
good, okay, that's great to hear.
Speaking of liability, do you have any thoughts on the insurance piece? Has that ever come up in your work?
Too much.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having permitting and a good deal of licensed electrician, some of that covers those issues.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're gonna switch topics, so feel free to stay or go. So committee, we still have a half an hour, and if we are gonna vote, basic needs budget tomorrow, I would like to make sure everybody's comfortable with the actual language. And I don't think we've done a full walkthrough.
Happy to do it. I can go.
So before we do the basic needs budget, are we gonna do?
Shannon's original time that she had committed to was 11:50. And that's the
Okay,
only
we'll do
time
it after basic
after.
needs budget.
Yeah, yeah,
I just wanna be clear.
yeah, so we'll spend 20 minutes with Damian. You don't know if Shannon is on yet.
She said she'll hopefully be on.
Okay, perfect. So, yes, we're gonna switch to Shannon when she gets here. Home care worker with a very tight schedule.
I was going to be at Pepsi tomorrow, but I can be here if that's necessary to vote.
Do you have a time you could vote on the bill?
The meeting is basically the same, amount of time as our meeting. But the topic
What
that,
about between 8:30 and 9?
probably, sure.
So,
But I was gonna say the topic is, on Thursday is our topic here on Friday, because they're coming on Friday.
right, and I'm not here Friday. So, yeah,
I think there's a Senate Rules Committee tomorrow morning at 8:30.
okay.
Is there?
I believe so. Double check.
If you could-
But yes,
I
so
can-
we'll
I
try
can
to
make
work
that
this
work.
out as well. You can
Very-
also hold the vote open for you,
Oh,
so that when you finish your meeting, if you give it 15 minutes, like, so we can close it. like-
okay, sure.
Great. Okay, so again, for the record, I'm Damon Leonard from Legislative Council. So this bill is S-246.
We have copies of it for people,
If not, I can throw it up on the screen.
I'm happy to print copies of it.
or they're in the bin,
Okay.
if we just go get them, that'd be
Do you
great.
want me to put it up on the screen or is?
Sure.
Okay.
Until we have, that's great.
Great. Okay, so as you can see behind me, what this is doing is it's making, amendments within the basic needs budget statute. So the first, real change is on line 16. We're saying that livable wage is defined to mean the hourly wage required in an urban or rural area for a full-time worker who lives in shared housing and has employer-assisted health insurance to pay for the basic needs budget, which is also defined. But is not amended in this definition. So the important change here is right now, the basic or the livable wage is an averaged amount, so it's averaged between urban and rural areas, so it doesn't actually give you an amount for either urban or rural areas in the state. And so this is breaking that out so that there's one livable wage for urban areas and one for rural areas. And that's the real major change here. The other piece here is the full-time worker lives in shared housing and has employer-assisted health insurance. It has taken out the language around two-person household with no children. But I believe that this is basically the same worker, just on the updated language and the methodology. And Patrick Titterton from JFO can provide a lot more detail on the actual methodology underneath this. Moving on to page 2, we're just striking out some outdated language from 2009, and we're clarifying again that it's for both urban and rural areas. That JFO is calculating the basic needs budgets and calculating the livable wages for every 2 years. And then finally on, well, not finally, second to last piece, we're clarifying on lines 9 and 10 of page 2 that we're using the 2023 Basic Needs Budget Technical Advisory Committee report. Again, updating language in here, which referenced all the way back to the 1999 livable income study, which had already been updated once. So that was super obsolete language. And we're just updating, and then we're adding intent language at the end to say that it is the intent of the General Assembly that the methodology be updated every 6 years or more frequently to ensure that it continues to reflect actual costs to maintain a basic standard of living in Vermont. As you all know, this is non-binding intent language, and we couldn't bind the future General Assembly anyway. But this at least reflects the goal that instead of doing this every 10 to 12 years, as has been the practice, it gets done every 6 years. Because I think what we found is that there have been needs for adjustments, and even with the adjustments within the authority of the Joint Fiscal Committee to approve them, they haven't reflected the actual changes in Vermont.
The last time we updated this methodology was 15 years ago.
Yeah, so this is
Lots have changed.
an overdue update to the methodology, and this is at least stating the goal that we'll do this more frequently in the future, though that will remain to be seen. Or it'll be up to all of you.
So these are the technical changes that we needed to change in statute. The others, the Joint Fiscal Committee changed.
Right, and the methodology was already or is already being used in the upcoming report. And that was in the statute that you passed last year.
Right.
We're working on getting Pat to come over. There was some miscommunication about getting him for the next 15 minutes.
I have an easy question.
I think calling us.
Do we wanna say wages? Or do we want that to be plural? So I know,
Where are
because
you?
now we have two, I guess.
We've already,
13.
yeah, the section is always, I mean, it is still the livable wage.
It's like minimum wage. You don't talk about
Yeah.
minimum wage.
Right, but we're going to have two.
There's actually,
Right, I know there's
yeah.
seven, but now
there's,
we're going to have two that are meeting.
so we've always had, right now 12 basic needs budgets. We say basic needs budget. And we've always had the one livable wage, but really that's just a reflection of an average of 2 of the 12 basic needs budgets. I don't.
It's almost like
It's
saying livable wage
necessary.
formula. If you say livable wages, you're creating plural for something else. Your wages are something different than a wage calculation.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessary to update the title.
That's fine.
But it is a good catch. And.
We need someone on the
appreciate it.
committee who reads everything. That's all this.
No, it's right there. It's,
So who read the entire technical corrections bill?
I skimmed through it.
That's-
You're on that, because she
Yeah.
usually looks.
I
for the
reviewed it.
technical.
I reviewed that. That was my job.
There was one House member who found 3 different errors in my section, so. And
Next year I'll do it.
appreciate
Were they unchanged sections that they found errors in?
No, they were.
Oh, I was like, they didn't.
They were
read.
little, they read the technical corrections bill
She
Mhm.
she did, and she.
cover to cover, and she found a couple of.
Was it a
technical-
newer member?
No,
No.
it was a very more clear. on who might
Okay,
read it.
yes,
And
yeah, I was like, is there a new version of this member?
544 pages. And then we had our chair of Senate GovOps who also found
Yes,
an error. So
we always
it
appreciate
always
that.
bears scrutiny. Our
Yeah.
work always bears scrutiny.
So anyway, any other questions on the language?
No, Pat's on his way over.
Great.
So I will just say on the 2 livable wage calculations, I argued as chair strenuously for one, because I think that we have blended our rural and urban areas pretty completely in this state. I don't, and to keep it as it was, but my committee, I was whooped by the committee, and the committee really felt that there was such a difference between rural costs and urban costs that they felt this was an important distinction to establish.
Well, I would imagine the number might look similar in the end, but you have different inputs that cost different amounts if you're in a rural or urban area.
Yeah, but yes, and so we look at food, we look at childcare, we look at a whole host of costs.
Right,
And-
transportation.
But it all balanced, anyway, so I felt it all balanced.
But like, for example, the Northeast Kingdom has the highest energy poverty in the state because as a function of their transportation and their energy costs in older buildings, they pay the most overall for all their fuel needs. I think that's helpful to know about the kingdom.
Yeah, absolutely, so that is why we established for the first time, not a blended one, but a separate.
Pat, thank you for coming on short notice. We have 10 minutes.
I took my eyes off you guys for one.
I know.
I know,
I know, we're
look what we
having a
did.
day. We're having a day.
It was coming, it was coming.
But if you, I think 10 minutes honestly should be sufficient so that we wouldn't need you back tomorrow. I'm hoping that's the case. So I want committee members to treat this like this is the time we have Pat to ask questions about the financial side of it.
We just walked through it with Damien.
Excellent. So I do.
Let's just go.
So Pat Tiverton joined fiscal office. I do have some slides on just sort of
Yes.
like basic structure of the report.
Yeah.
So let me just try to get into this. Thank you, Val.
Anticipating as always.
So now we'll start joint legislative management.
At 8:30.
At 8:30.
No, I wish I was.
You are, okay.
Are you paying this?
Didn't want-
This adult pay?
No, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so just quick outline, I'm just gonna go through a couple of definitions for this. I'm not sorry, Miss Damien's piece, I'm not sure if he covered some of this, but I just want to touch on some what's currently in statute, just because it's sort of the table setter for what the report is, what it's meant to be used for. And the changes we. And so basically the basic needs is just to cover what essentials, everyday Vermonters need to have in order to sort of lead a healthy and productive lifestyle. Importantly, it's basically what you need to be able to afford all of these things without public assistance. Really when we're talking about this particular report, the calculations that go into it, it's really sort of taking that piece of the equation out of it. So without any sort of state assistance, what's it cost to live here? And so I have to find people get a little bit confused between what is the basic needs budget and what is the livable wage. The budget itself is what you need to earn on in income for the year to be able to afford all of these different components. And then the livable wage is really just converting that into what the hourly wage, when you think about, I know some comments have been made that this is used for contract negotiations or setting employee prices. So that's really the distinction. And where this bill comes into play has to do with the livable wage. So you see here, it's written into statute that it's a two-person household. Currently, what JFO does is we assume that this is a cohabitating or married two-person household, and that comes into play when thinking about certain categories like housing and taxation, and just other sort of economies of scale of sort of merged finances, I guess.
So health insurance, right?
Health insurance is another good example. Yep. And so the other piece of this bill that relates to what's currently in statute is that the official livable wage refers to the average between what we come up with for the urban and rural areas. And what the bill's proposing to do is just sort of publish those separately as the official. So there are a bunch of basic assumptions, some of which were touched on with the technical advisory committee. But under current, sorry, I'm trying to talk fast because I know you're.
Yeah, you're good. You're doing great.
So currently in the report, we have these 6 family configurations. Within here, the configuration that's used for the official livable wage is that 2 adults with no children. Coming out of the technical advisory committee, there were 2 recommendations. One to add that single person shared housing, and then the other one was to, because there are already so many categories, to remove that 2 adults with 2 children with only 1 wage earner. The reason being, with the new childcare subsidies, that would cause that budget to converge quite a lot with the 2 adults, 2 children, but 2 wage earners. Which I'm not sure is part of this bill, that particular piece.
It doesn't need to be, right?
Right,
Does not need to
Yeah.
be. No.
It's
to remove it,
right.
did not.
So just to clarify a little bit about what we mean when we call urban, refer to urban and rural areas. For the purposes of the report, urban is classified as Chittenden County, and then rural refers to the rest of the state. Obviously, I know there's lots of ideas of how that distinction should be made, but part of this comes to how data is reported and available data that we have access to. For urban, we have access to a lot of Burlington MSA data. So we use that as a sort of the reference point for what is urban in the state. Some other assumptions, and this first one was actually recently changed as part of the advisory committee's recommendations. Single persons in single adult households. We had been assuming that was a female between the ages of 20 and 50. But when we talk about single adults living alone without children, it's really kind of a 50-50 split. But when you talk about single adults living with children, that is much more heavily skewed female. In effect, what that change does do is increase some budgets. For example, food
Mhm.
The methodology we use for that is the budget is higher for males than it is for females, so this does actually bump that up a little bit. All the families are living independently, so it's not two adults living with their parents, and then maybe they also have two kids. It's just an independent family. The assumption around the ages of the children does tie back to whether it's preschool or within K through 12 age, which had a lot more impact when we were talking about the previous childcare landscape. It means a little bit less now with the new subsidies, but the committee did maintain that assumption, although there was some discussion about that. The housing, importantly, the housing estimates are, we assume everyone is a renter, so we do not consider home ownership when we're talking about this. It's the housing budget that we're building for people is based on rent and utilities. And then, like I said, so single parents, we're assuming no outside support like child support, and public assistance is not included, with the exception of these childcare subsidies. But those are kind of viewed for this report as more of a public good because the income ranges go so high and all of these household budgets fall within that whole people.
We do have our witness. I just want to do a 2-minute.
Okay.
We can return to this tomorrow.
We are returning to it tomorrow. How many slides do you have left?
I have a few left, but they go pretty quick.
Okay.
So there are certain categories that we include expenses for that are included in statute. You see those on the left. And for the purposes of this bill, the biggest impacts by switching the official livable wage would come in to play in the housing, because we have to assume it's another bedroom, and the taxation and healthcare, like you mentioned. There are some things since the statute was written that have gone through JFC and approved these new spending categories because they're just things that people need, even if they weren't originally written into statute. And that includes clothing, that includes telecommunication, and most recently they just added personal care products, so like shampoo, that's not what previously included.
Yeah.
And I just have a few slides here. They're basically snapshots from the report to show you how it's structured in the report. I mean, these will be on your website for reference if you guys want to look at it that way when you have a little more time. But this is how the taxes shake out and what we use.
And the childcare too, we have the.
So this is from the previous report, but yes,
Oh, right,
childcare
this
is
is from
line item
22.
here. Yeah. And then just again to show you that we do publish for each discrete household type, the urban and rural livable wages. And the rest is really just showing you how that's changed over the past couple of months. So I think that's probably good enough reference for now. If you guys have any follow-up questions.
Thanks. Yeah, if people could email Pat any follow-up questions between now and tomorrow, and we'll have those documents for reference when we vote. But I don't foresee needing to come back.
Just let me know.
But it would be great to have you just for questions.
We don't know the timing yet, so
Yes.
we'll keep.
I'm close by.
Which we're grateful for.
Yes,
All of it.
Shannon, we have you, right, Shannon?
And Shannon is.
Let's just. Hi, so first I want to offer an apology as the chair. I know that as a home care worker who's also juggling this other role you have to your union, that it's a lot to manage as you try to make sure Home Care Workers United has their voices heard. I think what you have to say is relevant to both of the issues that we've been talking about today, basic needs budget and a labor protection amendment. We did not vote on either of those bills today. We're voting on them tomorrow and in the future. And we also invite you and your members, the people you wanted to have come back. It doesn't have to be related to a bill. It can just be making sure we're focused on your plight and especially how it relates to the state budget, which I know you've mentioned because we're responsible for at least some of your members' payment structure. So really glad to have you, Shannon. Thanks so much for all your patience. The legislative process is a confusing one for everyone, but we're so glad you could make the time.
Thank you. Yes, we're figuring it out slowly, and I'm grateful to be here. So my Shannon Dufour Martinez. I've been a home care provider for 14 years. I started this work in my early 20s as a children's personal care provider, being paid $9.78 an hour. At that time, I supported a school-age child who needed a devoted adult to help them navigate social situations, be safe in the community, and develop routines at home. Now I support that same person as they attempt to find normalcy in an adult world that wasn't designed for them. We practice life skills, budgeting, identifying scams, meal preparation, household responsibilities. I help them avoid mental health crises, reduce impact of isolation from their neurotypical peers, and work through the many barriers that face people with developmental disabilities daily. I also invite them into my home as a respite provider when their parent needs time off. Imagine if your 23-year-old could not spend the night home alone. Without this long-term relationship, this person's mental and physical health would greatly suffer, as would the well-being of their primary caregiver. My partner and I live paycheck to paycheck in a world of rising costs. Many weeks I have to run my gas nearly empty, waiting for a clear, or have to use the food shelf rather than the grocery store for essentials. When my old car failed inspection this year, I took out yet another loan to buy a new car, new to me, that's already been on the road for 12 years, bringing my debt to income ratio into very dangerous territory. Our home, a quaint, comfortable structure approaching its 230th birthday, needs repairs that we cannot afford. This winter, we went without safe water for over 3 months after our well became contaminated. Because we don't have the resources to water system overhaul, we had to piece together a solution, max out our credit cards, draw from our savings, and rely on the kindness of others to supply us with drinking water and access to showers and laundry. This is not financial. A family living modestly with 2 full-time incomes should not have to struggle like this. Add to this the debt already incurred to improve weatherization and fortify our foundation against increasingly wet conditions, and we are sapped. I don't know how we'll handle the upcoming need for a new roof. However, ones in my field supplement my income as an independent home care provider with a part-time position doing very similar work through a designated. This allows me to tap into employer-sponsored health insurance and retirement benefits, things that independent home care providers in Vermont do not have access to. It also is an expensive after-school and summer care for my child. Most home care workers are earning just above minimum wage without these benefits, job protections, access to training, or other supports that reduce barriers and increase well-being. My jobs combined is enough to meet my family's basic needs. Yet we were recently told that we earn too much for Dr. Dinosaur, which my 7-year-old has been on since infancy. This will mean another $300 expense each month without any increase to our income. Home workers are significantly underpaid. Our work exists in the shadows. State programs for Vermonters set their budgets based on an hourly rate of $14.05 per hour. This includes self and surrogate managed programs under Dale and Department of Health, such as Choices for Care for older adults, care attendant services, developmental services, brain injury program, and children's personal care. It's no wonder that the number of providers enrolled in these state-funded programs has from over 7,000 in 2014 to 5,343 today, based on payroll data received from the state. But the number of people needing care is rising every year as our population ages. Many of these people have long-term needs, and many others are seeking short-term support to step down from institutional or nursing level care. As you've heard from long-term care facilities, they do not have enough beds or staff to keep long-term boarders. Skilled compassionate home care workers are a vital piece of the puzzle for caring for people with disabilities and the tens of thousands of older Vermonters who want to age safely in place. Vermont Home Care United, the bargaining unit for these widely dispersed essential workers, recently proposed a livable wage based on the data from the most recent basic needs budget report. The state countered our proposal with an increase to $14.06 per hour. This is clear, especially when the care that we provide is dependent on our ability to maintain a home and vehicle that can be used for our work. It's crucial that the budget acknowledges the increasing rise in the cost of living. We also need state leaders to seriously consider the livable wage data reported here when creating the budgets that fund these care services. To say that a single rural community needs to earn a minimum of $18.80 per hour to get by, then approve a budget that requires thousands of workers to earn less than that is a disgrace. Where equity is life, not just an term used by the privileged and well-compensated. All Vermonters are counted to set this bar and help us attain a better quality of life.
Thank you, Shannon. We have a few more minutes. I just wanted to say we lost 2 committee members who have a required meeting for another committee that they're on, but they were really engaged and wanted me to share that, you know, it had an impact, that we're nodding along. I think 2 of us looked at each other and we have at least an idea to make sure we're tracking. I would like us to be tracking the difference between our basic needs budget and what we pay workers that are paid through our state budget. So we're really clear on the difference. And I think our chair of appropriations would be sympathetic to that. That's what I'll say.
Well,
Yeah.
and it isn't just what we pay directly as a state, but what we pay through our designated agencies.
Yes,
and
exactly.
our,
State funded, yeah.
State funded.
Mhm.
But actually, my idea was more radical than that.
Oh, great.
But I definitely think we need to do that.
This will be our backup idea.
What's your idea?
My radical idea
Yeah.
is that we enact that the livable wage needs to be the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That is radical and appreciated.
We go through so
And
much
the longer
work calculating it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've mentioned that to Matt, so he knows
Yeah.
my radical idea. But it is, we go through all this work, as identifying what basic needs are. Franklin Roosevelt identified the minimum wage as being the minimum amount you need to live on. We go through all this effort identifying what the minimum amount you need to live on now, both rurally and urbanly. Why aren't we using it?
Yeah. So I'm happy to keep taking testimony on that. We've said this year that we'd look at the minimum wage period when we had time because we were waiting for the minimum wage annual information or something. We were waiting to see what inflation did, and it comes out March 1st.
And we were
That's what I
sad
read.
and not able to pass it up to the amount we needed to in the past. So it's.
So, you know, Shannon, what we often say is one voice really make the difference to our process when it's people who are most impacted. So this really does help us with our basic needs budget bill, where we could probably ask for some new monitoring. And ways to talk about this as a problem that the state is creating. We have other more radical ideas that will probably take more of the session.
But this idea, the same idea, we need to track this.
And we really want to have you and Kate and others back. So I want to be able to say that while we're in real time together, because I know how hard it is for you to always be answering emails. So we have your phone number if that's easier, but in the coming weeks after our town meeting break, you know, we want to hear about our home care workers, since you are absolutely part of the backbone. Our care economy is really, really important to us. And you're the backbone of that. And so we really want to hear more about the struggles you're facing and how the state needs to do better. So we so appreciate your time. Yeah, any last words that you want to share?
Yeah, and we are, as I think you know, we are in negotiations with the state right now. So now is a very good time to be putting, having these conversations and putting pressure on the negotiating parties, because the proposal of $14.36 an hour came out a month and a half ago, and it's unrealistic that people will be able to continue working in this field with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's a proposal to go forward.
Yeah, that's
missed
supposedly
that.
the increase, that's the increase they're proposing.
Wow, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and when you say we are negotiating, what union is it that you are a member of?
I'm a member bargaining committee for Vermont Home Care Workers United, AFSCME 4802.
Okay. Thank you again, Shannon. If email is okay for us to plan that date with you and Kate and others, we'll get on one thread and we'll do that. But if at any time you are feeling like something's not getting through and you need to talk closer to real time, we can make sure you have the office number. Office number, big room number. So you can reach Magali and she can reach you if you're comfortable with that, just so we limit confusion in a confusing process that we have. So thanks for sticking with us and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah.
But for quick
And
change.
Did
because
you
we're all-
send? Yes, we have, you sent us. Right.
Thank you so much again, Shannon. We will see you again. And we appreciate ASME being here too to listen. So thank you. Thanks so much.